One day before Christmas, my dad smirked at me and said, "Your brother's friends are spending the holiday here. It is only 30 people." My brother nodded, expecting me to cook clean and bow to his every need. I just smiled. That night, I flew to Paris for a trip. When they woke up to an empty kitchen, my brother's face turned pale. But the real surprise was still to come. My name is Juliet. I am 33 years old, and my family has always treated me like a glorified caterer. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who severely underestimated your worth. The air was biting cold on December 23rd as I pulled my car into the sprawling circular driveway of my parents' upscale Chicago suburban estate. Snow flurries danced around the windshield, but inside my chest, a warm, glowing fire of accomplishment was burning brightly. I was absolutely exhausted, running on 3 hours of sleep and countless cups of coffee, but I was also victorious. Just hours earlier, I had secretly signed the final paperwork to close an $18 million deal, selling my boutique luxury hospitality firm to a massive global conglomerate. It was the biggest professional milestone of my life. I had built my company from the ground up, working grueling 90-hour weeks, sacrificing my social life, and pouring my heart into every detail. Now, I was a self-made multimillionaire and a newly appointed corporate executive. I had kept the negotiations completely quiet, planning to announce my massive success at Christmas dinner and finally earn the respect I had craved for a lifetime. But respect is not something my family gives freely. In my family, respect is a currency reserved exclusively for my older brother Cameron. Cameron is 35 years old, a flashy venture capitalist who wears expensive suits, drives leased sports cars, and constantly talks about seed funding and market disruption. To my parents, Richard and Patricia Cameron is the absolute golden boy. He can do no wrong. They brag about him constantly at their country club dinners, inflating his minor successes into world-changing achievements. Meanwhile, they have always viewed my thriving business as a cute little hobby. Whenever someone asked what I did, my mother would sigh and say, "Juliet likes to cook for people." It did not matter that I managed a massive staff-handled high-end corporate accounts and generated millions in revenue. To them, I was just a girl who played around in the kitchen because I could not hack it in the real business world. I grabbed my overnight bag from the passenger seat, took a deep breath of the freezing winter air, and walked up the grand brick steps to the front door. I unlocked the heavy oak door, expecting the familiar smell of pine needles and cinnamon. Instead, the house smelled like stale anxiety and panic. I barely had time to take my coat off before my mother Patricia marched into the grand foyer. She was wearing her pristine cashmere loungewear, her face tight with stress, and her perfectly manicured hands clutching a crumpled coffee-stained piece of paper. My father Richard was right behind her, his face set in a rigid scowl. There was no warm holiday greeting. There was no hug. There was not even a simple hello or an inquiry about my drive. Patricia marched right up to me and shoved the stained paper directly into my hand. "You are late," she snapped, her voice echoing sharply in the high-ceilinged hallway. "Here is the grocery list. You need to get to the store right now before it closes. The organic butcher is already holding the Wagyu tenderloins, but you need to pick up the truffle oil, the saffron, and the fresh sea bass." I stood there frozen, clutching the straps of my overnight bag in one hand and the damp piece of paper in the other. I looked down at the list. It was massive, spanning 3 pages of highly specific luxury ingredients. "Mom, what is this?" I asked, my exhaustion making it difficult to process the sheer audacity of her demand. "What are all these groceries for?" Richard stepped forward, crossing his arms over his chest in a posture of absolute authority. "Cameron is hosting a crucial investor networking dinner for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day," my father boomed. "He has 30 high-net-worth individuals flying in from all over the country. It is a critical juncture for his startup Juliet. He needs this funding round desperately to scale his operations. We are talking about serious money here." I stared at them, the reality of their ambush slowly sinking in like a stone in my stomach. They wanted me to cater a 2-day corporate event for 30 elite guests. They wanted me to do it starting tomorrow, and they wanted me to do it completely alone. You want me to cook a 5-course plated dinner for 30 people? I asked, my voice trembling slightly as I tried to keep my temper in check. Plus breakfast and lunch on Christmas Day. Dad, I just worked a 90-hour week. I came home to celebrate the holidays and relax with my family. I cannot physically pull off a Michelin-level gala by myself with zero notice. Patricia let out a loud, exasperated sigh, rolling her eyes dramatically, as if I were a petulant teenager throwing a tantrum over chores. "Oh, Juliet, do not be so incredibly dramatic," she groaned, waving her hand dismissively. "You own a catering company. This is literally what you do. It is just cooking. You spend all day in the kitchen anyway, so what does it matter if you do it here? Every holiday is the same story with you complaining about helping your own blood." "It is a boutique hospitality firm, Mom," I corrected her, fighting the familiar battle I had fought for a decade. "And my entire staff is off for the holidays. I gave them paid time off so they could be with their families. I cannot just magically conjure up a waitstaff, prep cooks, and sous chefs on the day before Christmas Eve." "Family helps family," Richard interrupted, his voice taking on that sharp, condescending edge he always used when he wanted to force my compliance. "Your brother is doing real business, Juliet. He is dealing with millions of dollars and high-stakes corporate maneuvering. He cannot be worried about hors d'oeuvres and wine pairings while he is trying to secure his future. It is time you put your little cooking hobby to real use and actually support him for once. No complaining." The absolute disrespect radiating from my father hit me like a physical blow. I was standing in their grand foyer holding a grocery list that would require thousands of dollars and days of back-breaking physical labor to execute. They did not view me as a daughter. They viewed me as a free resource, an unpaid servant whose only value was facilitating the success of their precious golden boy. "Who is paying for all these groceries?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain level as I scanned the exorbitant items on the stained paper. Patricia scoffed as if the question itself was deeply offensive. "Just put it on your business credit card, sweetie. You can write it off as a tax expense or something." Cameron is burning through his personal capital to impress these executives, so we all need to pitch in and do our part. "So you expect me to fund this corporate event too?" I asked, the indignation rising hot and thick in my chest. "You want me to buy thousands of dollars worth of luxury ingredients and then spend my entire Christmas cooking and serving his friends?" "It is an investment in your brother's future," Richard stated firmly, stepping closer to intimidate me. "When his venture capital firm takes off and becomes a massive success, he will remember who helped him get there. If you do a good job this weekend, maybe he will even hire you to cater his corporate retreats down the line. It would be great exposure for your little business." I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. I had just sold my company for $18 million. I had just been appointed as the lead United States executive for a massive global conglomerate. I had sat in boardrooms with the most ruthless negotiators in the industry and commanded their absolute respect. And here was my father standing in his suburban foyer, telling me that if I scrubbed his floors and cooked for his son, I might be lucky enough to get thrown a few catering scraps in the future. Patricia did not even wait for my response. She was already mentally moving on to her next set of demands. "Make sure you polish the good silver tonight," she barked, pointing toward the formal dining room. "Cameron's guests are accustomed to a very high standard of living. These are not your usual local charity organizers or neighborhood brides, Juliet. These are heavy hitters. We absolutely cannot afford any mistakes. I want you up by 5 o'clock tomorrow morning to start the prep work. The house needs to smell like roasting herbs by the time they arrive." The sheer weight of their entitlement pressed down on me. For my entire life, I had bent over backwards to accommodate their demands, hoping that eventually my hard work would earn their love and validation. I had accepted the lesser gifts, the ignored birthdays, the constant comparisons to Cameron. I had swallowed my pride and smiled through the pain because I believed that family was supposed to stick together. But standing there with the stained grocery list in my hand, I finally realized the ugly truth. They were never going to see my worth because their eyes were completely blinded by their obsession with my brother. "Do not worry, Mom. I said, my voice smooth and perfectly pitched. I will make sure tomorrow is exactly what everyone in this room truly deserves. Patricia let out a huff of breath, relaxing her tense shoulders. Well, it is about time you showed some gratitude, she muttered, adjusting her cashmere sleeve. Just make sure you do not forget the saffron. Cameron's investors have very refined palates. I will not forget a single thing, I promised. I folded the stained grocery list, slipping it neatly into the pocket of my blazer. I picked up my overnight bag. I will leave right now to get started on the arrangements. Cameron did not even look up from the Waterford crystal he was polishing with a microfiber cloth. Wear black tomorrow, Juliet, he called out, and make sure your shoes do not squeak on the dining room hardwood. Silence is golden. Silence is golden, I repeated softly. I turned around and walked out of the grand foyer, hearing the heavy oak front door click shut behind me. The crisp winter air hit my face, instantly cooling the residual heat of the house. I walked down the grand brick steps, my heels clicking rhythmically against the icy pavement. I did not look back. I did not storm off. I walked with the deliberate, measured pace of a woman who held the winning hand. When I reached my car, a sleek black luxury sedan parked discreetly near the edge of their sprawling driveway, I unlocked it and slid into the driver's seat. The leather was cold, but I felt incredibly warm. I tossed my overnight bag onto the passenger seat and pulled the grocery list from my pocket. I smoothed out the wrinkled paper, looking one last time at the absurd demands written in my mother's looping cursive. Wagyu beef, truffle oil, fresh sea bass. I laughed, a genuine bright sound that filled the quiet cabin of my car. I pulled out my phone. I did not open my banking app to check my credit limit for groceries. I opened my airline application. My fingers danced across the screen, typing in my destination. Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport. I bypassed the economy options, scrolling straight to the international first-class cabins. A red-eye flight was boarding at O'Hare International Airport in exactly 4 hours. It was perfect. I tapped the screen, securing a luxurious lie-flat suite for the overnight journey. The price tag was exorbitant, but it did not matter. I had 18 million reasons not to care. I started the engine, the quiet hum of the German engineering matching the steady rhythm of my heart. As I drove away from the suffocating suburban neighborhood, I felt the invisible chains of familial obligation snapping one by one. I was not driving to the organic butcher. I was not heading to the specialty seafood market. I was heading to my sanctuary. My parents had never visited my apartment. Whenever I invited them, they claimed the city traffic was too chaotic, or that downtown parking was a nightmare. They preferred to imagine me living in a cramped studio, above a noisy street, struggling to make ends meet. They needed me to be struggling because it validated their narrative that Cameron was the only true success story in the family. They needed me to be small so his mediocre achievements could look massive. 30 minutes later, I pulled into the private underground parking garage of a glittering high-rise building in the heart of downtown Chicago. This was where I actually lived. A secure luxury building that housed successful entrepreneurs, corporate lawyers, and professional athletes. I parked in my assigned spot and took the private elevator up to the lobby. "Good evening, Ms. Anderson," the concierge greeted me, standing up straight behind the polished marble front desk. He smiled warmly. "Congratulations on the big news, by the way. I read the press release online. Summit Hospitality is lucky to have you." "Thank you." I smiled back, feeling a rush of genuine appreciation. The ink on the $18 million acquisition was barely dry, but the corporate world moves fast. Have a wonderful holiday. I took the express elevator up to the penthouse level. When I unlocked my front door, I was greeted by the expansive view of the Chicago skyline sparkling against the dark waters of Lake Michigan. My apartment was impeccably designed, featuring sleek modern furniture, original artwork, and a state-of-the-art kitchen that would make any professional chef weep with joy. It was a stark contrast to the cluttered traditional aesthetic of my parents' house. This was a space I had bought and paid for with my own blood, sweat, and tears. It was a physical manifestation of my independence, a fortress built on long nights, endless negotiations, and unwavering ambition. I walked straight to my master bedroom and pulled a pristine designer carry-on from my walk-in closet. I did not need much for this trip. The executives at Summit Hospitality had arranged everything for my arrival, including a corporate wardrobe stylist if I needed one. I packed a few tailored blazers, cashmere sweaters, and my favorite pair of incredibly expensive heels. These were not clothes meant for blending into the background or serving hors d'oeuvres to venture capitalists. These were clothes meant for commanding boardrooms and closing international deals. As I zipped my suitcase shut, I felt a vibration in my blazer pocket. I pulled out the crumpled grocery list. I walked into my pristine kitchen, stopping in front of the stainless steel trash can. I held the paper over the bin, watching it flutter slightly in the air conditioning. My mother expected me to be at the butcher right now, begging for a last-minute prime cut of beef. Cameron expected me to be sourcing black uniforms so I could scurry around his fake networking dinner like a mouse. I dropped the list into the trash. It landed with a soft, satisfying thud. I took a quick shower, washing away the lingering smell of my parents' house. I changed into comfortable but chic travel clothes, a pair of tailored trousers, a silk blouse, and a long camel coat. I grabbed my passport from my safe, running my thumb over the gold-embossed seal. The passport was full of stamps from my business trips around the world, trips my family assumed were cheap vacations I could barely afford. I called a private car service requesting an immediate pickup. Within 10 minutes, a black SUV was idling outside my building. I handed my single designer bag to the driver and slid into the spacious back seat. The drive to O'Hare International Airport was smooth and fast. The city streets were relatively quiet, people already tucked away in their homes preparing for Christmas Eve. As we approached the airport, the driver bypassed the chaotic economy drop-off zones and pulled directly up to the VIP terminal entrance. An airline representative was already waiting at the curb, ready to escort me through private security. This was the reality of my life. I was not a kitchen servant. I was a high-priority corporate asset traveling internationally to meet with global executives. My time was valuable, my expertise was highly sought after, and my presence commanded respect. I handed my passport to the attendant, smiling as she processed my first-class ticket. "Welcome back, Ms. Anderson," she said warmly, handing me my boarding pass. "The Polaris Lounge is ready for you whenever you would like to head upstairs. We will let you know as soon as your suite is ready for boarding." I made my way to the exclusive lounge, leaving the noise and stress of the main terminal far behind. The lounge was a haven of quiet luxury, featuring plush seating, dim lighting, and a premium dining area. I found a secluded corner near the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac. Massive jet engines hummed in the distance, preparing to carry people across oceans and continents. I sat down, sinking into the comfortable leather chair. A server immediately approached, offering me a glass of vintage champagne. I accepted the flute, holding it up to watch the tiny golden bubbles rise to the surface. It was finally time to deliver the opening act of my revenge. I pulled out my phone and opened the family group chat. The last message was from Patricia, sent just 10 minutes ago. It read, "Juliet, I hope you got the sea bass. Cameron says his investors prefer a pescatarian option for the third course. Do not mess this up." I stared at the glowing screen, reading the demanding, entitled words. I took a slow sip of my champagne, savoring the crisp, cold taste. Then my fingers moved across the keyboard, typing my response. I did not write an essay. I did not explain my success. I did not tell them about the $18 million or the Summit Hospitality acquisition. I simply typed the exact truth of my current situation. "By the way, my flight lands in Paris tomorrow at 10 in the morning. Bon appétit." I hit send. I did not wait to see the read receipts. I did not wait for the little typing bubbles to appear indicating their incoming panic. I simply pressed the power button on the side of my phone and switched the device entirely to airplane mode. The screen went dark, cutting off their access to me completely. I placed the phone face down on the small table next to my champagne flute. For a moment, I just sat there listening to the quiet ambient music of the airport lounge. I pictured my mother staring at her phone screen, trying to comprehend the text message. I pictured Cameron realizing that his free Michelin star chef was currently cruising at 30,000 feet across the Atlantic Ocean. I pictured my father demanding answers from a phone number that would not ring. The panic, the chaos, the absolute disaster that was about to unfold in their pristine suburban house tomorrow night was entirely of their own making. They had demanded a 5-course plated dinner for 30 elite corporate guests with less than 24 hours' notice. They had treated me like disposable help, assuming I would simply bow my head and absorb the abuse because family helps family. They had weaponized my passion for hospitality and twisted it into an obligation. But hospitality is a gift reserved for those who appreciate it. For those who do not, it is a service. And my services were no longer available to them at any price. The lounge attendant approached my table, her voice soft and professional. "Ms. Anderson, your flight to Paris is ready for boarding." "Thank you," I said, finishing the last sip of my champagne. I stood up, grabbed my designer carry-on, and walked toward the boarding gate. Tomorrow my family would wake up to an empty kitchen and a completely shattered reality. But tomorrow, I would wake up in Paris, a multimillionaire, a corporate executive, and finally entirely free. The journey ahead was not just a flight across the ocean. It was the absolute reclamation of my worth, my dignity, and my future. Let them deal with the consequences. My new life was waiting for me. The heavy cabin door of the aircraft sealed shut behind me, locking out the noise of the busy terminal. I settled into my private lie-flat suite, pulling the plush, pristine blanket over my legs. The flight attendant handed me a warm towel and offered to hang my coat. I thanked her, my voice soft and completely relaxed. For the next 8 hours, I was entirely unreachable. I drank a glass of sparkling water, adjusted my seat into a horizontal bed, and fell into the deepest, most restful sleep I had experienced in a decade. I did not dream of grocery lists or burnt roasts or my brother's arrogant demands. I dreamed of absolutely nothing at all. When I woke up, bright sunlight was streaming through the aircraft windows. We were descending through the thick clouds over France, the sprawling green countryside giving way to the intricate historic architecture of Paris. I freshened up in the spacious lavatory, applying a coat of bold red lipstick that made me feel like I was wearing armor. I was no longer the exhausted daughter showing up in Chicago to beg for scraps of affection. I was Juliet arriving in Europe as a conquering corporate executive. I breezed through customs with priority access, bypassing the long lines of tourists. As I walked into the busy arrivals hall at Charles de Gaulle Airport, a man in a sharp black suit was waiting holding a digital tablet. It displayed my name alongside the sleek gold logo of Summit Hospitality. He greeted me in perfect English, took my designer bag, and escorted me to a waiting Mercedes Maybach. The drive into the city was breathtaking. The winter air in Paris felt entirely different from Chicago. It was crisp, clean, and charged with history. We pulled up to a historic luxury hotel situated right in the heart of the city. The hotel manager greeted me personally at the grand entrance. Summit Hospitality had arranged absolutely everything for my arrival. I was escorted directly to a penthouse suite featuring a massive stone balcony that offered an unobstructed, breathtaking view of the Eiffel Tower. The suite was decorated with fresh white roses, and a bottle of vintage champagne rested in a silver ice bucket on the glass coffee table. A handwritten welcome note from the Global Chief Executive Officer of Summit sat next to the crystal glasses, expressing his excitement to officially welcome me to the executive board. I walked out onto the balcony, pulling my coat tightly around my shoulders. The intricate iron railing was cold under my bare hands, but the sight of the iconic Parisian skyline made my chest swell with absolute triumph. I had built a massive hospitality empire from scratch, and it had brought me here to the top of the entire world. I had a highly anticipated lunch meeting scheduled with the European acquisition team in exactly 2 hours. I unpacked my suit, a stunning tailored emerald green ensemble that screamed authority and unapologetic power. I took my time getting ready, savoring the quiet luxury of the gleaming marble bathroom. There was no one yelling at me to hurry up. There was no one demanding I shrink myself to make them feel more comfortable. There was only peace. When I walked into the private dining room of the Michelin-starred restaurant downstairs, the 3 senior executives from Summit Hospitality immediately stood up to greet me. They were older, distinguished men who managed billions of dollars in global assets. They did not look at me like a domestic servant or a glorified caterer. They looked at me with genuine professional respect and deep admiration. "Juliet, it is an absolute honor to finally meet you in person," said the lead executive, extending his hand warmly. "The portfolio you built over the last 5 years is nothing short of extraordinary. We are thrilled to have you taking over the United States division. Your innovative strategies are exactly what this global conglomerate needs moving forward." "Thank you," I replied, shaking his hand firmly. "I am incredibly excited to integrate my team and begin aggressively expanding our North American footprint." We sat down to a spectacular 5-course lunch. I did not have to prep a single ingredient. I did not have to worry about the precise timing of the courses or whether the plates were perfectly clean before serving. I simply sat at the table engaged in high-level corporate strategy and allowed myself to be served by professionals. We discussed market shares, aggressive expansion tactics, and the seamless integration of my $18 million company into their massive global network. They valued my input completely. They listened intently when I spoke, taking notes on my suggestions. The contrast between this elegant room and my parents' hostile dining room could not have been more extreme. After the highly successful meeting concluded, I returned to my penthouse suite. It was mid-afternoon in Paris, which meant morning was just breaking back in Chicago. It was Christmas Eve, the exact day of my brother's highly anticipated elite investor dinner. I sat on the edge of my plush king-sized bed, poured myself a fresh glass of the vintage champagne, and decided it was finally time to check the fallout. I turned off airplane mode and connected my phone to the high-speed hotel wireless internet. My phone instantly froze as an absolute avalanche of notifications flooded the home screen. My device vibrated continuously for 2 solid minutes, processing the sheer volume of missed calls, text messages, and frantic voicemails. There were 42 missed calls from my mother, 38 from my father, and over 50 from my brother Cameron. I did not bother reading the text messages. I went straight to the voicemails, pressing the phone to my ear as I took a slow, deliberate sip of champagne. The first voicemail was from Patricia, timestamped at 7 in the morning, Chicago time. "Juliet, where are you? I came down to the kitchen and nothing is prepped. The refrigerator is completely empty. You were supposed to be up at 5. Call me the second you get this." Her voice was laced with that familiar, irritated entitlement she always used when addressing me. The second voicemail arrived at 9. "Juliet, this is not funny anymore. Your father went to the organic butcher and they said you never picked up the tenderloins. They sold them to someone else. Where are the groceries? Cameron is starting to panic. You need to get here right now." The irritation in her voice had morphed into genuine, undeniable anxiety. I skipped ahead to a voicemail from my father, timestamped at noon. "Juliet Anderson, you listen to me very carefully. I do not know what kind of childish stunt you are pulling today, but you are jeopardizing your brother's entire future. You get your ass back to this house immediately. If you ruin this important dinner for Cameron, you will never step foot in this family again." I smiled warmly at his empty threat. He was trying to banish me from a toxic place I had already permanently abandoned of my own free will. The final voicemail was from Cameron, timestamped at exactly 4 in the afternoon. The exact time his 30 elite investors were scheduled to arrive at the house. His voice was completely frantic, high-pitched, and totally breathless. "Juliet, please pick up the phone right now. They are pulling into the driveway. There are black cars everywhere. The house smells like nothing. Mom is in the kitchen crying over frozen chicken breasts, and we have absolutely no food to serve them. You cannot do this to me today. These people manage billions of dollars. You are ruining my life. Answer the damn phone." The voicemail ended with a sharp, panicked click. I set my phone down on the soft bed, letting out a long, slow breath of total satisfaction. I could picture the chaotic scene in perfect, vivid detail. Cameron standing in the grand foyer, wearing his expensive, custom-tailored navy suit, sweating profusely as the doorbell rang. Patricia frantically trying to hide her cashmere loungewear while staring uselessly at rock-hard poultry in the kitchen sink. Richard, pacing the hardwood floor, realizing that his aggressive demands had completely backfired on all of them. 30 high-net-worth individuals accustomed to the absolute finest hospitality in the entire world were currently standing in my parents' house expecting a Michelin-level holiday gala. Instead, they were being greeted by the pungent smell of pure panic and an empty dining room table adorned with nothing but empty Waterford crystal wine glasses. There was no fresh sea bass roasting in the oven. There was no expensive truffle oil drizzled over perfectly plated appetizers. There was no invisible sister wearing a plain black uniform to quietly serve them from the left and clear their plates from the right. I imagined Cameron trying to maintain his arrogant, confident facade while desperately scrolling through his phone trying to order mass delivery pizza on Christmas Eve for a room full of powerful venture capitalists. The sheer, unadulterated public humiliation he was experiencing right at that very moment was entirely of his own making. He had demanded I be invisible, so I made myself completely untraceable. He had demanded silence, so I gave him the deafening quiet of an empty kitchen. I walked back out onto the stone balcony holding my glass of champagne. The Eiffel Tower was beginning to sparkle brilliantly against the dark twilight sky, thousands of golden lights shimmering in the Parisian dusk. I lifted my phone one last time and opened my social media application. I snapped a beautiful, serene photo of the glowing tower, framing it perfectly against the historic city architecture. I uploaded the crisp image to my profile. I did not write a long paragraph explaining my actions. I did not mention my family or the spectacular disaster currently unfolding in Chicago. I typed two simple words for the caption: holiday peace. I hit post and immediately turned my phone off, completely tossing it onto the sofa inside the suite. I did not need to see their reactions. I did not need to read the explosive fallout that would inevitably flood my comments section. I already knew exactly what was happening back home. Cameron's wealthy investors were walking out of my parents' house in absolute disgust. They were leaving the empty dining room, pulling their expensive winter coats back on, and instructing their private drivers to take them to a proper restaurant. Cameron's $5 million seed funding round was completely dead in the water. His reputation as a competent, detail-oriented visionary was thoroughly destroyed. My parents' grand illusion of their perfect, successful son was shattering right in front of their eyes. I raised my glass of champagne to the glittering Paris skyline and took a long, satisfying drink. The continuous cycle of emotional abuse was permanently broken. I had reclaimed my power, my dignity, and my brilliant future. The holiday ambush had failed miserably, and my sweet revenge was served ice cold from 3,000 miles away. Let them feast on the severe consequences of their own entitlement. I had a massive global empire to run. The first 2 weeks of January passed in a whirlwind of corporate transitions and exhilarating triumphs. I returned to Chicago not as a boutique business owner, but as a high-ranking executive for Summit Hospitality. My days were spent in sleek glass conference rooms overlooking the icy grid of the city, orchestrating the integration of my former company into their massive global portfolio. I was thriving. I was respected. I was entirely untouchable. During that time, I kept my personal phone strictly on silent mode. I knew my family was spiraling, but I refused to let their toxic fallout pollute my professional victory. It was not until the second week of the new year that I finally decided to check my messages. Amidst the hundreds of frantic texts and furious missed calls, one specific message from my father caught my attention. It was not a plea or a casual request. It was a rigid formal summons demanding my immediate presence at their house on Sunday afternoon to discuss the severe financial damages I had supposedly caused the family. I could have ignored it. I could have easily blocked their numbers and continued living my spectacular new reality without ever looking back. But a quiet, simmering part of me wanted to see the aftermath with my own eyes. I wanted to look at them not as a terrified daughter seeking validation, but as a woman holding all the power. I wanted to hear exactly how they planned to justify their monumental failure. When I pulled my car into their circular driveway that Sunday, the atmosphere of the estate felt drastically different. The festive holiday decorations had been stripped away, leaving the sprawling brick house looking cold gray and incredibly hollow. I walked up the front steps, my designer coat wrapping me in a layer of absolute confidence, and pushed open the heavy oak door. I did not bother knocking. The moment I stepped into the foyer, the thick, heavy stench of desperation hit me. They were waiting for me in the formal dining room, sitting around the same mahogany table where Cameron had so arrogantly displayed the Waterford crystal glasses just weeks prior. My mother, Patricia, looked haggard. Her usually flawless hair was slightly unkempt, and the dark circles under her eyes were visible even from a distance. My father, Richard, sat at the head of the table, gripping a thick manila folder with white knuckles. But it was Cameron who truly embodied the disaster. The golden boy looked completely shattered. His custom-tailored suit was gone, replaced by wrinkled, casual clothes. He was slouched in his chair, staring at the polished wood surface, with an expression of pure, venomous hatred. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face in this house, Juliet," my mother hissed the moment I crossed the threshold. She stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Do you have any idea what you did? Do you have any comprehension of the absolute humiliation we suffered because of your petty, jealous little stunt?" I remained standing near the entryway, refusing to take a seat at their table. I simply crossed my arms and offered a serene, placid smile. "I took a lovely vacation to Paris, Mom. I am not sure how my international travel itinerary equates to a stunt." Patricia let out a harsh, bitter laugh, throwing her hands in the air. "A vacation? You abandoned your family on Christmas Eve. You left us with 30 high-profile investors standing in our living room with absolutely nothing to eat. We had to order delivery pizza, Juliet. Delivery pizza. Do you know how embarrassing it was to watch billionaires eating greasy slices out of cardboard boxes in my formal dining room? They left before 9 o'clock. They walked out and they completely cut Cameron off. Cameron finally looked up, his eyes red and brimming with furious tears. "You destroyed my seed funding round," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic and rage. "I had $5 million lined up, Juliet. $5 million. These executives were ready to write the checks that would secure my entire future, and you purposely sabotaged the dinner because you could not stand to see me succeed. You have always been jealous of me. You have always resented the fact that I am doing real business while you play around with food." I let out a soft, genuine laugh. The absolute delusion required to blame me for his failure was staggering. "Cameron, if your startup was actually viable, investors would not pull $5 million in funding just because the catering fell through. Real businesses survive bad dinners. If they walked out and cut you off, it is because they saw through your hollow pitch. They realized you were a fraud and the pizza was just the convenient excuse they needed to escape your terrible presentation. That is enough." Richard slammed his hand down on the table, causing both Patricia and Cameron to flinch. He stood up, towering over the table, projecting that same intimidating authority he had used to control me my entire life. But looking at him now, I felt absolutely nothing. He was just an angry old man clutching at disappearing control. "You committed an act of targeted financial sabotage against your own brother." Richard declared, his tone deadly serious. "You made a verbal agreement to provide catering services for a crucial corporate event, and you maliciously abandoned your post to inflict maximum financial damage. You ruined his professional reputation, and you made this family a laughingstock in the Chicago investment community. We are not going to let you walk away from this without consequences. You are going to make this right." I tilted my head, studying him with mild amusement. "Make it right. And exactly how do you propose I do that, Dad? Am I supposed to bake Cameron a batch of apology cookies to win his billionaires back?" Richard did not smile. He picked up the thick manila folder from the table and slid it forcefully across the polished wood. It stopped right at the edge near my feet. "That is a formal legal demand letter," he stated coldly. "I had my corporate attorneys draft it on Friday. Since your malicious actions directly cost your brother his $5 million investment round, you are legally and morally obligated to provide restitution to keep his company afloat." I looked down at the folder, but I did not touch it. "Restitution." I repeated, testing the word on my tongue. You want me to pay Cameron because his investors realized he was a terrible bet. Patricia stepped forward, her eyes narrowing into vicious slits. We are demanding $150,000, Juliet. It is the absolute bare minimum required to keep his startup from going bankrupt by the end of the month. You owe this family. You destroyed his reputation and now you are going to buy it back. I stared at them, my mind genuinely struggling to process the sheer magnitude of their entitlement. They had ambushed me, demanded I work for free, treated me like a disposable servant, and then blamed me when their own pathetic lack of planning resulted in a disaster. Now they were attempting to extort me to cover up Cameron's monumental business failures. I slowly reached down and picked up the manila folder. I opened it, scanning the ridiculous legal jargon printed on the thick stationery. It was a hollow threat, a document designed purely to intimidate a woman they still believed was a struggling small business owner. They actually thought I would be terrified by legal letterhead. You want me to hand over $150,000? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Yes, Cameron spat, gripping the edge of the table. You are going to go to the bank tomorrow morning. You are going to take out a business loan against your little catering company, and you are going to wire the funds directly into my corporate account. If you have to mortgage your equipment or sell your delivery vans, I do not care. You owe me this money, Juliet. You ruined my life and you are going to pay for it. I closed the folder, holding it loosely in my hand. I looked at the three people who were supposed to be my family. I saw the greed in their eyes, the desperate, grasping need to maintain their illusions of superiority at my total expense. They viewed me as nothing more than a sacrificial lamb meant to be slaughtered on the altar of Cameron's fragile ego. The demand was not just insulting, it was absolute comedy. They were demanding $150,000 from a woman who had just deposited $18 million into her bank account. I smiled warmly, dropping the folder back onto the mahogany table with a soft thud. Their desperate extortion attempt was destined to end in absolute failure. To truly understand the pure, unadulterated desperation radiating from my family at that mahogany table, you have to rewind the clock back to the spectacular disaster of Christmas Eve. I knew exactly what happened in that house because our security system recorded every agonizing minute, and I watched the footage later with a glass of champagne in my hand. It was a masterpiece of self-destruction. At 2:00 in the afternoon, Patricia descended the sweeping staircase wearing her pristine holiday cashmere. She expected the house to smell like roasting herbs, brown butter, and expensive truffles. She expected to see me scurrying around the kitchen in a plain black uniform, invisible and compliant. Instead, she was met with the sterile scent of lemon pledge and absolute deafening silence. She walked into the kitchen, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. The countertops were gleaming and completely empty. The professional-grade ovens were ice cold. She checked the massive double-door refrigerator, expecting to see silver platters of prepared hors d'oeuvres marinating Wagyu beef and fresh sea bass. There was nothing inside but a carton of skim milk and a half-eaten container of yogurt. The initial flicker of annoyance bloomed into severe irritation. She pulled out her phone and dialed my number, fully prepared to deliver a blistering lecture about time management. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. She marched into the home office where Richard was enjoying a glass of scotch. She snapped at him to find Cameron immediately. Cameron was upstairs in his bedroom, meticulously adjusting the silk tie of his custom navy suit. He was practicing his corporate pitch in the full-length mirror, envisioning the millions of dollars that would soon flow into his bank account. When Patricia burst through the bedroom door demanding to know where I was, Cameron simply rolled his eyes. He told her I was probably out fetching last-minute ingredients because I was inherently disorganized. He told her to stop stressing and let the help do the work. But the clock was ticking relentlessly. It was now 3 in the afternoon. The first wave of high-net-worth investors was scheduled to arrive in exactly 1 hour. Patricia dialed the organic butcher herself, demanding to know why the meat had not been delivered. The butcher informed her in a very confused tone that the order was never picked up. He explained that they had already sold the reserved premium cuts to another customer since the shop was closing early for the holiday. True panic finally struck the household. The reality of the situation hit them with the force of a physical blow. There was no food. There was no chef. There was absolutely no backup plan. Patricia sprinted back to the kitchen, throwing open the doors of the deep freezer. She dug past bags of frozen vegetables and unearthed a solid block of frozen chicken breasts from 6 months ago. She threw them into the stainless steel sink, turning the hot water on full blast in a desperate, useless attempt to thaw them. Richard was red in the face, screaming into his cell phone as he tried to reach any upscale catering company in the greater Chicago area. He offered double, then triple their usual rates. Every single company laughed at him. It was Christmas Eve. Every chef and waitstaff in the city was either fully booked or spending the holiday with their own families. No one was available to save them. Cameron was sweating profusely, his carefully styled hair losing its shape as he paced the length of the grand foyer. He realized with a sudden jolt of horror that he had expected me to purchase the alcohol too. He ran to the dining room. The vintage Waterford crystal wine glasses sat entirely empty on the long mahogany table, mocking him. There was no vintage wine, no aged scotch, no champagne to offer the billionaires who were currently on their way. At exactly 4 o'clock, the front doorbell chimed. It was a sharp, piercing sound that sealed their absolute doom. Through the front windows, Cameron watched a fleet of black luxury town cars pull into the circular driveway. 30 elite corporate executives stepped out into the freezing snow, wearing bespoke suits and carrying expensive holiday gifts. These were people who regularly dined at Michelin-starred restaurants. They expected a 5-course culinary masterpiece. They expected a seamless display of wealth and competence. Cameron forced a tight plastic smile onto his face and opened the door, ushering the powerful executives into the grand foyer. The guests handed their heavy winter coats to Richard, who was awkwardly playing the role of a coat check attendant, his face burning with humiliation. The executives mingled, moving gracefully into the formal living room, expecting to be greeted by circulating waiters carrying silver trays of hot appetizers. But the grand illusion could not last. There were no appetizers. There was no rich aroma of a gourmet meal wafting from the kitchen. There was only the sound of Patricia hyperventilating behind the closed pantry door, desperately trying to slice frozen chicken with a bread knife. Cameron excused himself from a conversation with a prominent venture capitalist and locked himself in the downstairs bathroom. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely unlock his phone screen. He pulled up a delivery application, desperately searching for any restaurant still open. The high-end steakhouses were closed. The upscale Italian bistros were closed. The sushi restaurants were closed. The only place accepting orders within a 10-mile radius was a cheap chain pizza restaurant. In a state of absolute manic despair, Cameron ordered 20 large pepperoni and cheese pizzas. He maxed out his credit card on the massive delivery order, praying the food would arrive quickly enough to salvage the evening. An hour passed. The executives were growing restless and visibly irritated. They had been offered nothing but tap water in expensive crystal glasses. The conversation in the living room had dried up entirely, replaced by hungry, annoyed whispers. They were exchanging glances, checking their expensive watches, and wondering why they had wasted their holiday evening on a startup founder who could not even provide a basic cocktail. Then the doorbell rang again. It was not a professional waiter carrying silver-domed platters. It was a confused teenager wearing a red baseball cap, holding towering stacks of greasy cardboard boxes. Cameron had to carry them into the formal dining room himself, his custom suit brushing against the cheap cardboard. The elite investors stared in stunned silence as Cameron placed the boxes onto the dining table. The grease from the cheap pepperoni seeped through the cardboard directly onto the imported mahogany wood, leaving permanent, ugly stains. The rich smell of cheap processed cheese and garlic powder filled the elegant room, clashing violently with the sophisticated decor. The room fell dead silent. No one reached for a slice. No one spoke. The investors looked at the greasy pizza, then looked at Cameron. The $5 million pitch died instantly in that very moment. Their respect for him evaporated faster than the melting snow outside. Cameron stood at the head of the table, a fraud exposed in his own home, watching his entire future burn to the ground. He attempted to offer a nervous, hollow laugh to break the overwhelming tension, but the sound fell completely flat. He stuttered through a pathetic excuse about a highly sought-after private chef experiencing a sudden medical emergency, but the seasoned executives simply saw right through the transparent lie. These were men and women who built massive global portfolios by detecting falsehoods and managing extreme risk. They recognized gross incompetence when they saw it. The lead investor, a ruthless man who commanded immense respect in the industry, set his crystal water glass down with a sharp, definitive click. He did not say a single word. He simply buttoned his suit jacket, turned on his heel, and walked straight toward the front door. The rest of the executives immediately followed his lead, filing out of the formal living room in a silent, unified procession of absolute rejection. Richard tried to block the doorway, offering frantic, desperate apologies and promising to reschedule the dinner at a luxury restaurant, but they completely ignored him. They retrieved their own heavy winter coats from the grand foyer, leaving the holiday gifts they had brought sitting abandoned on the entryway console table. Cameron chased them out into the freezing snow, begging them to stay, pleading for just 10 minutes to pitch his innovative software platform. They did not even look back at him. The fleet of black luxury town cars reversed out of the circular driveway, leaving deep tire tracks in the pristine white snow. Cameron fell to his knees on the icy pavement, clutching his chest, as his $5 million dream was permanently extinguished, leaving nothing behind but cold, greasy pizza boxes. I woke up the next morning bathed in the soft, golden sunlight of a Parisian Christmas. The heavy blackout curtains of my penthouse suite had been programmed to open gradually, allowing the natural light to gently rouse me from a deep, dreamless sleep. I stretched against the high thread count linens, feeling a profound sense of physical and emotional lightness. For the first 33 years of my life, Christmas morning had been a chaotic, stressful nightmare. It was usually marked by my mother's shrill voice barking orders from the kitchen, my father's complaints about the cost of gifts, and my brother's relentless demands for attention. But today, there was only the tranquil silence of an elite European hotel. I slipped out of bed and wrapped myself in a thick, monogrammed robe. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the city. The Eiffel Tower stood tall and majestic against a clear winter sky. Below me, the historic streets of Paris were quiet, the city resting peacefully for the holiday. I walked over to the digital console on the wall and ordered an extravagant room service breakfast. I requested fresh croissants, artisanal butter, house-made preserves, a pot of premium espresso, and a bowl of fresh berries. I did not have to lift a finger to prepare any of it. I was the guest of honor, not the unpaid help. While waiting for my breakfast, I finally picked up my phone from the sofa where I had tossed it the evening before. I had kept it on airplane mode all night, refusing to let their toxic panic interrupt my peace. But now, fully rested and completely secure in my power, I was ready to survey the wreckage. I turned off the airplane mode, and the device immediately began to vibrate violently in my hand. The sheer volume of notifications was staggering. The digital onslaught told a clear, sequential story of their spectacular downfall. The missed calls from my father had peaked around 5 o'clock in the afternoon Chicago time, exactly when the investors would have been walking out the door in disgust. Then came the barrage of text messages from my mother, sent in rapid succession over the next 3 hours. I scrolled past the texts, ignoring her typed-out hysteria, and opened my voicemail inbox. There were 14 new audio messages. I bypassed the earlier ones and clicked on a message from my father time-stamped at 6 in the evening. I pressed the phone to my ear as I walked back out onto the stone balcony. The crisp Parisian air was invigorating. Juliet Anderson, my father's voice, exploded through the speaker, loud and completely unhinged. You have crossed a line that you can never uncross. Do you have any idea what you have done? The investors left. They walked right out of the house. Cameron is having a literal panic attack in the driveway, and your mother is inconsolable. You deliberately sabotaged your own brother's future. You selfish, spiteful little girl. I demand that you call me back the exact second you get this message. You are going to fix this. You are going to call every single one of those executives and apologize. You will tell them you had a medical emergency. You will beg them to give Cameron another chance. If you do not fix this immediately, you are dead to this family. Do you hear me? You are completely disowned. The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. Disowned. He was threatening to revoke my membership to a family that treated me like garbage and expected me to be grateful for the privilege. He truly believed that cutting me off was the ultimate punishment. He had absolutely no idea that I had already cut the cord myself and I was currently thriving on another continent. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. The hotel staff wheeled in a silver cart carrying my breakfast. They set up the spread on the glass coffee table, pouring my espresso with practiced elegance. I thanked them generously and returned to my phone. I took a sip of the rich dark coffee and clicked on the next voicemail. This one was from Cameron. His voice did not have its usual arrogant swagger. He sounded completely broken, breathless, and dripping with venom. Juliet, you ruined my life. I hope you are happy. You ruined my entire life. They left. They all left and they blocked my number. $5 million is gone because you threw a jealous tantrum. You owe me, Juliet. You owe me everything. I am going to sue you. I am going to take your little catering company and I am going to liquidate it to cover my losses. You are going to pay for this. I will make sure you never work in the city of Chicago again. You are nothing without this family. You are a glorified servant and you just destroyed the only real success story in this house. You better wire me that money today or I swear to God I will ruin you. I set the phone down on the table next to a warm, flaky croissant. The absolute delusion of my brother was truly a marvel to witness. He was a 35-year-old man who had lied to investors, failed to secure basic catering for a corporate event, and served delivery pizza to billionaires. Yet in his warped reality, I was the one responsible for his failure. He was threatening to sue me for not working for free. He was threatening to destroy a company I had already sold for $18 million. He was throwing a tantrum like a spoiled toddler whose toy had been taken away. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel bad for him. I did not feel bad for my parents. They had engineered this disaster through their own massive entitlement. I had simply stepped out of the way and let gravity do the rest. It was time to deliver the final absolute checkmate. The executives back in Chicago had already witnessed the reality of Cameron's incompetence. Now it was time for my extended family and my parents' social circle to understand exactly where I stood. I picked up my phone and opened the camera application. I arranged my breakfast tray perfectly. The silver coffee pot, the crystal glasses, the fresh fruit, and the delicate pastries, all framed beautifully against the backdrop of the Eiffel Tower and the sprawling Paris skyline. The sunlight caught the edge of the champagne flute I had poured for myself, creating a brilliant, sparkling reflection. It was the absolute picture of extreme luxury success and unbothered peace. I snapped the photo, adjusting the lighting to highlight the crisp winter morning in France. I opened my social media profile. I knew my mother constantly monitored my accounts looking for things to criticize. I knew my extended family followed me. I knew Cameron used his fake corporate accounts to track my movements. I uploaded the image. I did not write a lengthy explanation defending myself. I did not mention the pizza, the failed investments, or the screaming voicemails. I did not need to lower myself to their level of mudslinging. I simply typed 2 words into the caption box. Holiday peace. I hit the post button. The image went live, instantly broadcasting my luxurious reality to everyone who believed I was currently hiding in shame. I set the phone down and began eating my breakfast, savoring the taste of the warm butter and the sweet preserves. It did not take long for the digital fallout to begin. Within 5 minutes, the notifications started rolling in. My phone screen lit up with incoming text messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins who had clearly been fed a completely different narrative by my mother. My Aunt Diane texted first. Juliet, are you in Paris? Your mother called me last night crying hysterically saying you had a mental breakdown and ruined Cameron's dinner party. She said you were missing. What is going on? Then came a message from my cousin David. Wow, Paris looks amazing. Uncle Richard told everyone you were locked in your apartment throwing a fit because you were jealous of Cameron. Looks like you are doing just fine. The absolute humiliation my parents must have felt in that moment was profound. They had likely spent the entire night and early morning spinning a desperate web of lies to their friends and extended family trying to control the damage. They had painted me as an unstable, jealous sister who had sabotaged a brilliant business deal. But my single photograph completely shattered their narrative. I was not having a breakdown. I was not hiding in shame. I was sitting in a penthouse suite in one of the most expensive cities in the world, living a life they could not even begin to comprehend. My phone began to ring. It was my mother. She had obviously seen the post. I watched her name flash across the screen, the device vibrating against the glass table. I did not answer. I watched it ring until it went to voicemail. She called again immediately. I let it ring again. I was never going to answer her calls again. The access she previously had to my life was permanently revoked. I picked up the phone, navigated to her contact profile, and pressed block. I did the exact same thing for my father. I did the same thing for Cameron. With 3 simple taps of my finger, I completely severed their ability to reach me. They were blocked from my phone, blocked from my social media, and permanently blocked from my future. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I finished my espresso, looking out over the incredible architecture of Paris. Tomorrow, I would step into a massive corporate boardroom as the United States Director of Acquisitions for Summit Hospitality. I would be shaking hands with the very people Cameron had tried and failed to impress. I would be wielding real power, making real decisions, and commanding real respect. But for today, I was just going to enjoy my Christmas. I finished my breakfast, walked back into the lavish suite, and began getting dressed for a day of exploring the city. I was going to visit museums, walk along the Seine, and perhaps buy myself something beautiful to celebrate my total liberation. The storm was raging back in Chicago, but I was standing in the sunlight. The game was over, and I had won. The first 2 weeks of January passed in a magnificent blur of corporate transitions and exhilarating professional triumphs. I returned to Chicago not as a boutique business owner, but as a high-ranking executive for Summit Hospitality. My days were spent in sleek glass conference rooms, overlooking the icy grid of the city, orchestrating the integration of my former company into their massive global portfolio. I was thriving. I was respected. I was entirely untouchable. During that time, I kept my personal phone numbers completely disconnected from my toxic past. I had blocked my parents and brother on every conceivable platform. I knew my family was spiraling in the aftermath of their ruined Christmas Eve. But I absolutely refused to let their toxic fallout pollute my professional victory. It was not until the second week of the new year that their desperation finally breached my fortified walls. I was sitting at my custom mahogany desk in my corner office, reviewing a quarterly acquisition report, when my executive assistant knocked gently on the glass door. She handed me a thick certified envelope that had been forwarded from the old mailing address of my catering company. I sliced the heavy paper open with a silver letter opener. Inside was a formal demand letter, printed on the intimidating letterhead of a local law firm I recognized as belonging to one of my father's country club friends. Attached to the legal jargon was a handwritten note from Richard. It was not a plea or a casual request. It was a rigid, formal summons, demanding my immediate presence at their house on Sunday afternoon to discuss the severe financial damages I had supposedly caused the family. I could have ignored it entirely. I could have easily handed the pathetic document to Summit Hospitality's ruthless corporate legal team and let them crush my father into dust. I could have continued living my spectacular new reality without ever looking back. But a quiet, simmering part of me wanted to see the aftermath with my own eyes. I wanted to look at them not as a terrified daughter seeking validation, but as a woman holding all the power in the room. I wanted to hear exactly how they planned to justify their monumental failure. When I pulled my car into their circular driveway that Sunday afternoon, the atmosphere of the estate felt drastically different. The festive holiday decorations had been stripped away, leaving the sprawling brick house looking cold gray and incredibly hollow. The driveway that was supposed to be filled with the luxury vehicles of eager venture capitalists was completely empty, save for Cameron's leased sports car, which looked decidedly less glamorous covered in winter slush. I walked up the front steps, my designer wool coat wrapping me in a thick layer of absolute confidence, and pushed open the heavy oak door. I did not bother knocking. The moment I stepped into the foyer, the thick, heavy stench of desperation hit me. It was palpable, hanging in the air like a dark cloud. They were waiting for me in the formal dining room, sitting around the exact same table where Cameron had so arrogantly displayed the Waterford crystal glasses just weeks prior. My mother, Patricia, looked haggard. Her usually flawless blonde hair was slightly unkempt, and the dark circles under her eyes were visible even from a distance. My father, Richard, sat at the head of the table, gripping a thick manila folder with white knuckles. But it was Cameron who truly embodied the disaster. The golden boy looked completely shattered. His custom-tailored navy suit was gone, replaced by a wrinkled gray sweater and faded jeans. He was slouched in his chair, staring at the polished wood surface, with an expression of pure, venomous hatred. His posture screamed of a man who had lost everything and was desperately searching for a scapegoat. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face in this house, Juliet," my mother hissed the moment I crossed the threshold. She stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Do you have any idea what you did? Do you have any comprehension of the absolute humiliation we suffered because of your petty, jealous little stunt?" I remained standing near the entryway, refusing to take a seat at their table. I simply crossed my arms and offered a serene, placid smile. "I took a lovely holiday vacation to Paris, Mom. I am not sure how my international travel itinerary equates to a stunt." Patricia let out a harsh, bitter laugh, throwing her hands in the air. "A vacation. You abandoned your family on Christmas Eve. You left us with 30 high-profile investors standing in our living room with absolutely nothing to eat. We had to order delivery pizza, Juliet." Delivery pizza. Do you know how embarrassing it was to watch billionaires eating greasy slices out of cardboard boxes in my formal dining room? They left before 9 o'clock. They walked out and they completely cut Cameron off. Cameron finally looked up, his eyes red and brimming with furious tears. "You destroyed my seed funding round," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic and rage. "I had $5 million lined up, Juliet. $5 million. These executives were ready to write the checks that would secure my entire future, and you purposely sabotaged the dinner because you could not stand to see me succeed. You have always been jealous of me. You have always resented the fact that I am doing real business while you play around with food." I let out a soft, genuine laugh. The absolute delusion required to blame me for his failure was staggering. Cameron, if your startup was actually viable, investors would not pull $5 million in funding just because the catering fell through. Real businesses survive bad dinners. If they walked out and cut you off, it is because they saw through your hollow pitch. They realized you were a fraud, and the pizza was just the convenient excuse they needed to escape your terrible presentation. "That is enough." Richard slammed his hand down on the table, causing both Patricia and Cameron to flinch. He stood up, towering over the table, projecting that same intimidating authority he had used to control me my entire life. But looking at him now, I felt absolutely nothing. He was just an angry old man, clutching at disappearing control. "You committed an act of targeted financial sabotage against your own brother," Richard declared, his tone deadly serious. "You made a verbal agreement to provide catering services for a crucial corporate event, and you maliciously abandoned your post to inflict maximum financial damage. You ruined his professional reputation, and you made this family a laughingstock in the Chicago investment community. We are not going to let you walk away from this without consequences. You are going to make this right." I tilted my head, studying him with mild amusement. Make it right. And exactly how do you propose I do that, Dad? Am I supposed to bake Cameron a batch of apology cookies to win his billionaires back? Richard did not smile. He picked up the thick manila folder from the table and slid it forcefully across the polished wood. It stopped right at the edge near my feet. That is a formal legal demand letter, he stated coldly. I had my attorneys drafted on Friday. Since your malicious actions directly cost your brother his $5 million investment round, you are legally and morally obligated to provide restitution to keep his company afloat. I looked down at the folder, but I did not touch it. Restitution. I repeated, testing the word on my tongue. You want me to pay Cameron because his investors realized he was a terrible bet. Patricia stepped forward, her eyes narrowing into vicious slits. We are demanding $150,000, Juliet. It is the absolute bare minimum required to keep his startup from going bankrupt by the end of the month. You owe this family. You destroyed his reputation, and now you are going to buy it back. I stared at them, my mind genuinely struggling to process the sheer magnitude of their entitlement. They had ambushed me, demanded I work for free, treated me like a disposable servant, and then blamed me when their own pathetic lack of planning resulted in a disaster. Now they were attempting to extort me to cover up Cameron's monumental business failures. I slowly reached down and picked up the manila folder. I opened it, scanning the ridiculous legal jargon printed on the thick stationery. It was a hollow threat, a document designed purely to intimidate a woman they still believed was a struggling small business owner. They actually thought I would be terrified by legal letterhead. You want me to hand over $150,000? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Yes, Cameron spat, gripping the edge of the table. You are going to go to the bank tomorrow morning. You are going to take out a business loan against your little catering company, and you are going to wire the funds directly into my corporate account. If you have to mortgage your equipment or sell your delivery vans, I do not care. You owe me this money, Juliet. You ruined my life and you are going to pay for it. I closed the folder, holding it loosely in my hand. I looked at the three people who were supposed to be my family. I saw the greed in their eyes, the desperate, grasping need to maintain their illusions of superiority at my total expense. They viewed me as nothing more than a sacrificial lamb meant to be slaughtered on the altar of Cameron's fragile ego. The demand was not just insulting, it was absolute comedy. They were demanding $150,000 from a woman who had just deposited $18 million into her bank account. I smiled warmly, dropping the folder back onto the mahogany table with a soft thud. Their desperate extortion attempt was destined to end in absolute failure. I looked at the thick manila folder resting on the polished wood surface. The absolute silence in the formal dining room was deafening. My father sat with his chest puffed out, expecting me to cower. My mother stared at me with her lips pressed into a thin, tight line, waiting for my inevitable surrender. Cameron simply glared, breathing heavily through his nose like a cornered animal. For my entire life, this exact family dynamic had successfully beaten me into submission. They would gang up on me, present a united front of disappointment, and demand that I sacrifice my own well-being to restore the fragile peace of the household. But today, the dynamic was completely shattered. I did not feel the familiar flutter of anxiety in my stomach. I did not feel the urgent, desperate need to please them. I felt nothing but a profound, icy calm. I am not giving you a single cent, I said. My voice was steady, quiet, and carried the undeniable weight of absolute finality. I am not taking out a business loan. I am not mortgaging my assets. I am not paying for a ruined dinner party that was entirely your own fault. Patricia slammed her hands flat against the mahogany table. Juliet Anderson, you will do exactly as your father says. You deliberately sabotaged your brother. You humiliated us in front of the most important people in this city. You owe us this money. It is the absolute least you can do to make up for your selfish, petty behavior. I owe you absolutely nothing, Mom, I replied, maintaining my serene smile. You demanded that I cater a massive event for free with less than 24 hours' notice. You demanded that I wear a servant uniform in my childhood home. You told me to remain invisible, so I made myself invisible. If Cameron could not secure his funding because he had to serve pizza to his investors, that is a reflection of his monumental incompetence, not my absence. Real executives do not invest in a man who cannot even manage a dinner party. Richard stood up, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. Do not speak to your mother that way. You are acting like a spoiled, arrogant child. This is a legal demand, Juliet. If you do not wire the funds to Cameron's corporate account by the end of the week, we will take you to court. We will sue you for breach of verbal contract and intentional infliction of financial distress. We will drain your little catering business dry with legal fees until you are forced to file for bankruptcy. A verbal contract requires mutual agreement, Dad, I pointed out smoothly. I never agreed to cook for your party. I told you I would give you exactly what you deserved, and I delivered on that promise perfectly. You can hire all the expensive country club lawyers you want. Any judge in the city will throw your ridiculous extortion attempt out of the courtroom before lunch. Cameron abruptly pushed his chair back. The wooden legs screeched violently against the hardwood floor. He marched around the large dining table, closing the distance between us until he was standing mere inches from my face. He reeked of stale alcohol and desperate sweat. The polished, confident venture capitalist facade he usually wore had completely melted away, leaving behind a vicious, frightened bully. You think this is funny? Cameron hissed, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. You think you can just walk away from this and go back to your pathetic little kitchen? You think you won. I did not step back. I did not flinch. I held my ground and looked directly into his bloodshot eyes. I already won, Cameron. I won the moment I got on that plane to Paris and left you to deal with the consequences of your own massive entitlement. You have absolutely no idea what I can do to you, he threatened, a cruel, malicious sneer twisting his features. I am a prominent venture capitalist, Juliet. I have connections all over this city. I know restaurant owners, event planners, and corporate executives. I know the people who hire your pathetic little catering company. If you do not give me that $150,000 right now, I will systematically destroy everything you have ever built. I tilted my head, feigning mild curiosity. And how exactly do you plan to do that, Cameron? I will blacklist you, he spat, spraying a tiny amount of saliva with his furious words. I will call every single contact in my network and tell them you are unreliable, unprofessional, and completely unhinged. I will make sure you never book another corporate event in the entire state of Illinois. But I will not stop there. I will create dozens of fake accounts online. I will flood your business pages with terrible reviews. I will say your food gave people severe food poisoning. I will call the city health department and report fake sanitation violations until they send inspectors to shut down your kitchens. I will bleed your reputation dry until you have to close your doors and beg for a job flipping burgers. I will ruin your life, just like you ruined mine. The sheer malice in his voice was designed to terrify me. He wanted me to break down in tears, to beg for his mercy, to promise him the money if he would just leave my business alone. Patricia and Richard stood in silence behind him, offering their tacit approval of his vicious extortion. They were perfectly willing to watch my brother destroy my livelihood if it meant saving his own. I stared at Cameron, processing the full extent of his pathetic threats. He was threatening a local catering company that no longer existed. He was threatening to blacklist a business owner who had just been appointed as the United States Director of Acquisitions for a massive global conglomerate. He was attempting to intimidate a woman who possessed $18 million in liquid capital. The absolute irony of the situation was too overwhelming to contain. I threw my head back and laughed. It was not a nervous giggle or a defensive chuckle. It was a loud, rich, full-throated laugh of pure, unadulterated amusement. The sound echoed brightly off the high ceilings of the formal dining room, bouncing against the expensive crystal chandelier and the antique china cabinets. I laughed until my chest ached, shaking my head at the sheer staggering delusion standing right in front of me. Cameron's sneer faltered, replaced by profound confusion. My parents exchanged panicked, bewildered glances. This was not the reaction they had anticipated. They expected fear and compliance. They did not expect genuine, uncontrollable hilarity. You think this is a joke? Cameron yelled, his face turning a deep, mottled purple. You think I will not do it. I will completely destroy you, Juliet. I slowly caught my breath, wiping a small tear of amusement from the corner of my eye. I looked at my brother, a man drowning in his own manufactured failures, and I felt a brief, fleeting surge of pity. He was so completely out of his depth, and he had absolutely no idea. Cameron, you can call whoever you want, I said, my voice dripping with cold, condescending pity. You can call the health department. You can call your imaginary network of executives. You can post 1 million fake reviews on the internet. I do not care. Do you want to know why I do not care? Because you are threatening a ghost. What the hell are you talking about? He demanded, his hands balling into tight fists at his sides. I am saying that your threats are completely meaningless, I replied, stepping even closer to him so he could see the absolute certainty in my eyes. You think you hold all the cards because you think you understand my life. You think I am just a struggling caterer desperate for approval. But you know absolutely nothing about me, Cameron. You do not know who I am. You do not know what I have built, and you certainly do not know who you are currently threatening. Patricia stepped forward, her voice shrill and demanding. Stop speaking in riddles, Juliet. You are acting completely unhinged. You are going to sign the loan paperwork, and you are going to pay your brother the money you owe him. I broke eye contact with Cameron and looked at my mother. I will never give this family another second of my time, let alone my money. You wanted a servant, but you got a woman who finally realized her own worth. You chose your golden boy, and now you get to watch him sink. I reached down and picked up the thick manila folder from the mahogany table. I opened it and pulled out the crisp, legally drafted demand letter. I held the heavy paper up in the air between us. This is garbage, I stated clearly. And it is the exact same amount of respect you will ever get from me again. With one swift, decisive motion, I tore the legal demand letter straight down the middle. The sound of the thick paper ripping sliced through the heavy silence of the dining room. I placed the 2 torn halves neatly back onto the polished mahogany table, right where the Waterford crystal glasses had sat on Christmas Eve. Cameron's jaw dropped open in absolute shock. Richard took a step forward, his face contorted with furious outrage, but he did not speak. They were completely paralyzed by my defiance. The invisible chains that had bound me to this family for 33 years were officially broken, leaving them with nothing but the torn shreds of their own failed extortion. I adjusted my designer wool coat, smoothing the luxurious fabric with calm, steady hands. I turned my back on my parents and my brother, and I walked out of the formal dining room. I crossed the grand foyer, my heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. I did not look back. I opened the heavy oak front door, stepping out into the cold, crisp winter air of the Chicago suburbs. As I walked down the brick steps toward my waiting car, I knew the war was far from over. But I had already won the most important battle. I had finally walked away, and I was never going to let them drag me back down into their miserable, desperate reality. Let Cameron try to destroy me. He was about to find out exactly what happens when you declare war on someone who owns the entire battlefield. I pulled open the door of my sleek black sedan and slid into the driver's seat. The leather was cold, but the satisfaction radiating through my veins kept me warm. I pressed the ignition button, and the engine roared to life, shattering the quiet suburban stillness. Looking through the rearview mirror, I could see the grand facade of my parents' estate standing tall against the gray winter sky. It used to look like a fortress, a place where my self-esteem was systematically dismantled. Now it just looked like a crumbling monument to their massive egos. I shifted the car into drive and slowly pulled out of the circular driveway. My phone rested silently on the passenger seat, still blissfully disconnected from their frantic attempts to reach me. I knew the moment I drove away, Cameron would be scrambling, trying to execute his pathetic threats. He would be dialing health inspectors and posting fabricated reviews, completely unaware that he was attacking a business entity that had already been legally absorbed into a global conglomerate. His desperation would only accelerate his own ultimate demise. As I navigated the winding suburban roads toward the highway heading back to my downtown penthouse and my spectacular new corporate life, I allowed myself one final smile. The demand letter was torn. The extortion attempt was obliterated. The golden boy was drowning. and I was driving straight toward the most brilliant, powerful chapter of my entire existence. They wanted a villain to blame for their spectacular failures, and I was more than happy to let them believe whatever narrative helped them sleep at night. Very soon, the absolute truth was going to hit Cameron like a devastating tidal wave, and I was going to be the one sitting in the executive chair watching him drown. The days following my departure from the suburban estate were a masterclass in swift corporate execution for me, but an absolute freefall into unmitigated financial ruin for my brother. The venture capital world in Chicago is a notoriously small, highly interconnected ecosystem. When 30 of the most prominent investors walked out of that disastrous Christmas Eve dinner party in utter disgust, the news spread faster than a wildfire. Whispers of his catastrophic failure echoed through every elite country club and private dining room in the city. The wealthy men and women who had previously entertained his arrogant phone calls suddenly became entirely unreachable. His urgent emails went completely unanswered. His desperate meeting requests were universally declined without a single word of explanation. The $5 million seed round that he had continuously bragged about was not just dead. It had dragged his entire professional reputation down into the grave with it. Cameron was bleeding capital at a terrifying, unsustainable rate. He had quietly maxed out his business credit cards just to keep his skeleton crew of developers on the payroll, and the expensive lease on his flashy downtown office space was already 60 days past due. The walls were rapidly closing in around him. He was a desperate man, drowning in a rising sea of unpaid invoices and broken corporate promises. He could no longer rely on his aggressive charm and expensive suits to pay the utility bills. The massive, impenetrable facade he had built for our parents was cracking violently, fracturing under the immense pressure of his own staggering incompetence. He needed an absolute miracle, and he needed it immediately before the bank inevitably moved in to seize his remaining liquid assets. In his absolute desperation, Cameron resorted to scraping the very bottom of his professional barrel. He had exactly one final favor left to call in. Years ago, he had helped a mid-level executive secure a highly coveted membership at an exclusive suburban golf club. That same executive now worked as a senior analyst for Summit Hospitality. Summit was a massive, terrifyingly powerful global conglomerate known for their aggressive corporate acquisitions and seemingly bottomless capital reserves. They typically swallowed smaller, struggling companies whole, stripping them for profitable parts or integrating their proprietary technology into their vast international network. Cameron did not actually want an acquisition. He wanted a financial lifeline. He called his contact late on a Tuesday night, begging and pleading to secure a 10-minute pitch meeting with their acquisitions department. He aggressively promised that he could spin his failing tech startup as a highly lucrative investment opportunity for their elite hospitality division. The contact was deeply reluctant, but felt strictly bound by his old social debt. After days of maneuvering, he finally managed to squeeze Cameron onto the executive schedule. He warned Cameron that he would be pitching directly to the newly appointed United States Director of Acquisitions. The contact did not provide a specific name, simply stating that the new director was a ruthless, brilliant visionary who had just finalized a massive international merger and absolutely did not tolerate fools. He told Cameron to bring his best numbers, because the new director was known for gutting weak business models within the first 2 minutes of a presentation. Cameron did not care about the dire warnings. In his deeply delusional mind, he firmly believed that his innate charm and aggressive venture capital buzzwords could easily manipulate absolutely anyone sitting across a boardroom table. He spent the entire night before the high-stakes meeting pacing back and forth in his luxury apartment, rehearsing his presentation in front of his bathroom mirror. He meticulously scrubbed the horrific financial data from his pitch deck, replacing the bleeding red numbers with wildly inflated revenue projections and entirely fabricated user engagement metrics. He convinced himself that the new director would be just another gullible corporate suit, eager to buy into his revolutionary vision of the future. When the cold morning of the pitch finally arrived, Cameron armored himself in his most expensive custom-tailored charcoal gray suit. He polished his Italian leather shoes until they gleamed like dark mirrors and strapped a heavy vintage Rolex to his wrist. It was all a carefully constructed costume, designed specifically to project an aura of massive wealth and unshakable competence. He looked exactly like a man who was already a self-made billionaire, not a desperate fraudster who was mere days away from declaring complete personal bankruptcy. He stood in front of his full-length mirror, adjusting his silk tie and offering his reflection a sharp, predatory smile. He was absolutely ready to conquer the building. The corporate headquarters of Summit Hospitality occupied the top 20 floors of a towering, glittering glass skyscraper located right in the absolute center of the downtown financial district. It was a physical monument to global market dominance. Cameron pulled his leased sports car into the underground VIP parking garage, handing his keys to a uniformed valet with a crisp, arrogant nod. He rode the express elevator up to the main reception level, his heart hammering violently against his ribs, but his face a perfectly constructed mask of cool indifference. The lobby was genuinely breathtaking. Massive floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning panoramic view of the freezing waters of Lake Michigan. The floors were cut from seamless imported Italian marble, and expensive abstract sculptures adorned the minimalist waiting areas. Every single detail in the room screamed of limitless wealth and intimidating corporate power. This was exactly the kind of elevated environment where Cameron believed he naturally belonged. He approached the sprawling reception desk, sliding his perfectly embossed business card across the polished stone surface with practiced ease. The receptionist, a young man in a sharp gray uniform, checked his digital itinerary on a sleek tablet. Mr. Anderson, the receptionist, said, his tone perfectly polite, but entirely devoid of any real warmth. "The director of acquisitions is expecting you on the 45th floor. Please take the private executive elevator located at the very end of the hall." Cameron retrieved his heavy card, adjusting his cuffs as he walked down the expansive, quiet corridor. He pressed the glowing call button and stepped into the private elevator. The stainless steel box shot upward smoothly, carrying him directly into the absolute upper echelon of the international corporate world. When the doors slid open with a soft chime, he stepped out onto the 45th floor. The atmosphere here was entirely different from the bustling main reception area below. It was incredibly quiet, serene, and pulsing with an undeniable silent authority. An executive assistant sat behind a sleek, curved desk, aggressively guarding the heavy frosted glass doors of the corner office. She looked up from her multiple monitors as Cameron approached, her eyes scanning his tailored suit with practiced clinical efficiency. "Cameron Anderson," he announced, flashing his most charming, blinding smile, hoping to win her over instantly. "I have a 10 o'clock pitch meeting scheduled with the Director of Acquisitions." The assistant did not return his bright smile. Her expression remained entirely neutral and strictly professional. She simply tapped her wireless earpiece and typed a quick, efficient message into her computer keyboard. "The director will see you now, Mr. Anderson," she stated, her voice perfectly level. She stood up and gestured gracefully toward the massive frosted glass doors. "You may go right in." Cameron took a deep, stabilizing breath, squaring his broad shoulders and lifting his chin to project maximum authority. He gripped the leather handle of his expensive briefcase tightly, his knuckles turning slightly white. He was entirely ready to deploy every manipulative psychological tactic he had ever learned in his career. He was going to walk into that massive corner office, charm the mysterious new director, secure a massive influx of emergency corporate cash, and completely save his crumbling empire from total destruction. He reached out and pushed open the heavy glass doors, stepping confidently over the threshold into the expansive sunlit office. He was completely and utterly unaware that he was walking straight into a meticulously designed slaughterhouse, carefully constructed by the very sister he had spent his entire life treating like absolute garbage. The office was vast, decorated in minimalist tones of slate and brushed steel, perfectly reflecting the ruthless efficiency of Summit hospitality. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the corner, providing a dizzying panoramic view of the city streets far below. A massive polished obsidian desk dominated the center of the room, positioned deliberately to force any visitor to walk the entire length of the luxurious space before arriving at the absolute seat of power. Cameron let his eyes wander over the expensive modern art adorning the walls, mentally calculating the immense corporate budget required to furnish such a commanding workspace. This level of sheer, unadulterated opulence validated his deepest desires. If he could just secure a fraction of the capital flowing through this single room, his massive debts would vanish overnight. He tightened his grip on his briefcase, feeling a sudden, exhilarating rush of adrenaline successfully mask his underlying terror. He cleared his throat, adopting his most authoritative pitch voice, ready to command the attention of the executive currently facing the windows. He smoothed the front of his tailored jacket one final time, ensuring not a single crease betrayed his desperate reality. The heavy frosted glass doors clicked silently shut behind him, sealing him safely inside the room. There was no retreating now. He took a bold, confident step forward across the plush carpeting, entirely prepared to deliver the performance of his lifetime and demand the millions he firmly believed he rightfully deserved. The days following my departure from the suburban estate were a masterclass in swift corporate execution for me, but an absolute freefall into unmitigated financial ruin for my brother. The venture capital world in Chicago is a notoriously small, highly interconnected ecosystem. When 30 of the most prominent investors walked out of that disastrous Christmas Eve dinner party in utter disgust, the news spread faster than a wildfire. Whispers of his catastrophic failure echoed through every elite country club and private dining room in the city. The wealthy men and women who had previously entertained his arrogant phone calls suddenly became entirely unreachable. His urgent emails went completely unanswered. His desperate meeting requests were universally declined without a single word of explanation. The $5 million seed round that he had continuously bragged about was not just dead. It had dragged his entire professional reputation down into the grave with it. Cameron was bleeding capital at a terrifying, unsustainable rate. He had quietly maxed out his business credit cards just to keep his skeleton crew of developers on the payroll, and the expensive lease on his flashy downtown office space was already 60 days past due. The walls were rapidly closing in around him. He was a desperate man, drowning in a rising sea of unpaid invoices and broken corporate promises. He could no longer rely on his aggressive charm and expensive suits to pay the utility bills. The massive, impenetrable facade he had built for our parents was cracking violently, fracturing under the immense pressure of his own staggering incompetence. He needed an absolute miracle, and he needed it immediately before the bank inevitably moved in to seize his remaining liquid assets. In his absolute desperation, Cameron resorted to scraping the very bottom of his professional barrel. He had exactly one final favor left to call in. Years ago, he had helped a mid-level executive secure a highly coveted membership at an exclusive suburban golf club. That same executive now worked as a senior analyst for Summit Hospitality. Summit was a massive, terrifyingly powerful global conglomerate known for their aggressive corporate acquisitions and seemingly bottomless capital reserves. They typically swallowed smaller, struggling companies whole, stripping them for profitable parts, or integrating their proprietary technology into their vast international network. Cameron did not actually want an acquisition. He wanted a financial lifeline. He called his contact late on a Tuesday night, begging and pleading to secure a 10-minute pitch meeting with their acquisitions department. He aggressively promised that he could spin his failing tech startup as a highly lucrative investment opportunity for their elite hospitality division. The contact was deeply reluctant, but felt strictly bound by his old social debt. After days of maneuvering, he finally managed to squeeze Cameron onto the executive schedule. He warned Cameron that he would be pitching directly to the newly appointed United States Director of Acquisitions. The contact did not provide a specific name, simply stating that the new director was a ruthless, brilliant visionary who had just finalized a massive international merger and absolutely did not tolerate fools. He told Cameron to bring his best numbers because the new director was known for gutting weak business models within the first 2 minutes of a presentation. Cameron did not care about the dire warnings. In his deeply delusional mind, he firmly believed that his innate charm and aggressive venture capital buzzwords could easily manipulate absolutely anyone sitting across a boardroom table. He spent the entire night before the high-stakes meeting, pacing back and forth in his luxury apartment, rehearsing his presentation in front of his bathroom mirror. He meticulously scrubbed the horrific financial data from his pitch deck, replacing the bleeding red numbers with wildly inflated revenue projections and entirely fabricated user engagement metrics. He convinced himself that the new director would be just another gullible corporate suit, eager to buy into his revolutionary vision of the future. When the cold morning of the pitch finally arrived, Cameron armored himself in his most expensive custom-tailored charcoal gray suit. He polished his Italian leather shoes until they gleamed like dark mirrors and strapped a heavy vintage Rolex to his wrist. It was all a carefully constructed costume designed specifically to project an aura of massive wealth and unshakable competence. He looked exactly like a man who was already a self-made billionaire, not a desperate fraudster who was mere days away from declaring complete personal bankruptcy. He stood in front of his full-length mirror, adjusting his silk tie and offering his reflection a sharp, predatory smile. He was absolutely ready to conquer the building. The corporate headquarters of Summit Hospitality occupied the top 20 floors of a towering, glittering glass skyscraper located right in the absolute center of the downtown financial district. It was a physical monument to global market dominance. Cameron pulled his leased sports car into the underground VIP parking garage, handing his keys to a uniformed valet with a crisp, arrogant nod. He rode the express elevator up to the main reception level, his heart hammering violently against his ribs, but his face a perfectly constructed mask of cool indifference. The lobby was genuinely breathtaking. Massive floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning panoramic view of the freezing waters of Lake Michigan. The floors were cut from seamless imported Italian marble, and expensive abstract sculptures adorned the minimalist waiting areas. Every single detail in the room screamed of limitless wealth and intimidating corporate power. This was exactly the kind of elevated environment where Cameron believed he naturally belonged. He approached the sprawling reception desk, sliding his perfectly embossed business card across the polished stone surface with practiced ease. The receptionist, a young man in a sharp gray uniform, checked his digital itinerary on a sleek tablet. "Mr. Anderson," the receptionist said, his tone perfectly polite, but entirely devoid of any real warmth. "The Director of Acquisitions is expecting you on the 45th floor. Please take the private executive elevator located at the very end of the hall." Cameron retrieved his heavy card, adjusting his cuffs as he walked down the expansive, quiet corridor. He pressed the glowing call button and stepped into the private elevator. The stainless steel box shot upwards smoothly, carrying him directly into the absolute upper echelon of the international corporate world. When the door slid open with a soft chime, he stepped out onto the 45th floor. The atmosphere here was entirely different from the bustling main reception area below. It was incredibly quiet, serene, and pulsing with an undeniable silent authority. An executive assistant sat behind a sleek, curved desk, aggressively guarding the heavy frosted glass doors of the corner office. She looked up from her multiple monitors as Cameron approached, her eyes scanning his tailored suit with practiced clinical efficiency. "Cameron Anderson," he announced, flashing his most charming, blinding smile, hoping to win her over instantly. "I have a 10 o'clock pitch meeting scheduled with the Director of Acquisitions." The assistant did not return his bright smile. Her expression remained entirely neutral and strictly professional. She simply tapped her wireless earpiece and typed a quick, efficient message into her computer keyboard. "The director will see you now, Mr. Anderson," she stated, her voice perfectly level. She stood up and gestured gracefully toward the massive frosted glass doors. "You may go right in." Cameron took a deep, stabilizing breath, squaring his broad shoulders and lifting his chin to project maximum authority. He gripped the leather handle of his expensive briefcase tightly, his knuckles turning slightly white. He was entirely ready to deploy every manipulative psychological tactic he had ever learned in his career. He was going to walk into that massive corner office charm, the mysterious new director secure a massive influx of emergency corporate cash, and completely save his crumbling empire from total destruction. He reached out and pushed open the heavy glass doors, stepping confidently over the threshold into the expansive sunlit office. He was completely and utterly unaware that he was walking straight into a meticulously designed slaughterhouse, carefully constructed by the very sister he had spent his entire life treating like absolute garbage. The office was vast, decorated in minimalist tones of slate and brushed steel, perfectly reflecting the ruthless efficiency of Summit hospitality. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the corner, providing a dizzying panoramic view of the city streets far below. A massive polished obsidian desk dominated the center of the room, positioned deliberately to force any visitor to walk the entire length of the luxurious space before arriving at the absolute seat of power. Cameron let his eyes wander over the expensive modern art adorning the walls, mentally calculating the immense corporate budget required to furnish such a commanding workspace. This level of sheer, unadulterated opulence validated his deepest desires. If he could just secure a fraction of the capital flowing through this single room, his massive debts would vanish overnight. He tightened his grip on his briefcase, feeling a sudden, exhilarating rush of adrenaline successfully mask his underlying terror. He cleared his throat, adopting his most authoritative pitch voice, ready to command the attention of the executive currently facing the windows. He smoothed the front of his tailored jacket one final time, ensuring not a single crease betrayed his desperate reality. The heavy frosted glass doors clicked silently shut behind him, sealing him safely inside the room. There was no retreating now. He took a bold, confident step forward across the plush carpeting, entirely prepared to deliver the performance of his lifetime and demand the millions he firmly believed he rightfully deserved. Cameron stood in the center of the massive office, his Italian leather shoes sinking slightly into the plush carpet. The high-backed leather executive chair was turned completely away from him, facing the sweeping panoramic view of the freezing Chicago skyline. He cleared his throat, a calculated sound designed to project absolute confidence. "Good morning," he began, his voice booming across the quiet room. "I am Cameron Anderson. I represent a revolutionary tech startup that is currently disrupting the entire market, and I am here to offer Summit Hospitality an unprecedented investment opportunity." The chair did not move immediately. The silence in the room stretched out heavy and deliberate. Then slowly, the dark leather chair began to swivel around. Cameron adjusted his grip on his briefcase, ready to deploy his brightest, most manipulative smile. But the smile died on his face instantly. The blood completely drained from his cheeks, leaving him pale and utterly paralyzed. I sat in the executive chair wearing my tailored emerald green suit, my hands steeped neatly on the polished obsidian desk. I looked directly into his wide, panicked eyes and let a slow, serene smile spread across my face. "Welcome to Summit Hospitality, Cameron," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and carrying absolute authority. "Please have a seat. We have a lot to discuss regarding your funding request." Cameron did not move. He stood frozen in the center of the room, his brain visibly short-circuiting as it desperately tried to process the impossible image in front of him. He blinked rapidly, looking around the massive office, as if expecting a hidden camera crew to jump out from behind the abstract sculptures. "This is a joke," he stammered, his carefully crafted corporate persona shattering into a million jagged pieces. "What are you doing here, Juliet? Where is the actual director of acquisitions? You need to leave before security arrests you for trespassing." I did not break eye contact. I leaned back comfortably in my chair, gesturing toward the two modern guest chairs positioned in front of my desk. "I am the United States Director of Acquisitions for Summit Hospitality," I stated clearly. "And you are currently trespassing on my valuable time. Sit down, Cameron." His jaw dropped open. He shook his head violently, his denial manifesting as a physical reflex. That is impossible. You own a tiny catering company. You cook food for local weddings. You do not run international corporate acquisitions. I sold my boutique hospitality firm to this global conglomerate 2 weeks ago. I explained, relishing the absolute devastation washing over his features. The acquisition was finalized for $18 million. As part of that highly lucrative buyout, I was appointed to lead their entire North American acquisitions department. This is my office. This is my desk. And you are standing in my boardroom begging for my money. Cameron stumbled backward slightly, his expensive Italian shoes suddenly feeling like lead weights. He reached out and grabbed the back of the guest chair to steady himself. $18 million, he whispered, the sheer magnitude of the number rendering him completely breathless. But the catastrophic revelations were only just beginning. I watched his panicked mind desperately trying to connect the dots, trying to understand how his carefully constructed universe had flipped entirely upside down. Do you remember the 30 elite investors you invited to our parents' house on Christmas Eve? I asked, keeping my tone conversational and light. The ones you desperately wanted to impress to secure your $5 million seed round. Cameron swallowed hard, a thick sheen of cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. What about them? He rasped. They were not your network, Cameron, I revealed, delivering the final crushing blow to his massive ego. You used a third-party broker to send out blind invitations to high-net-worth individuals in the hospitality sector. You had absolutely no idea who was actually on that guest list. Those 30 people were Summit hospitality executives. They were my new colleagues. They were attending that dinner because they wanted to evaluate the brother of their newest corporate director. Cameron's eyes widened in absolute horror as the suffocating reality of the situation finally crashed down upon him. The executives he had served greasy delivery pizza to the billionaires he had humiliated himself in front of were the exact same people who signed my $18 million paycheck. He had unknowingly invited my entire corporate team to witness his spectacular failure. You set me up! He accused, his voice rising to a frantic, hysterical pitch. You purposely humiliated me in front of your own bosses to ruin my life. I did not set you up, I corrected him sharply, my voice cutting through his pathetic excuses like a newly sharpened blade. You ambushed me with a grocery list. You demanded I wear a plain black uniform and remain invisible. I simply followed your exact instructions. I made myself invisible and allowed you to showcase your brilliant business acumen to the world. Cameron tightened his grip on his briefcase, desperately clinging to the very last shred of his fabricated corporate identity. He forced his shaking hands to open the leather flap, pulling out a thick stack of glossy presentation folders. He threw them onto my obsidian desk, his breathing ragged and uneven. My tech platform is revolutionary, he insisted, his voice dripping with pure, unfiltered desperation. The pizza was a minor logistical error. It has absolutely nothing to do with the viability of my software. If you just look at my projected revenue models, you will see that a $5 million investment will yield a massive return within 12 months. We can keep this in the family, Juliet. You can approve the funding right now. I looked down at the glossy presentation folders resting on my desk. I did not open them. I simply pushed them back toward him with a single manicured finger. I have already reviewed your financials, Cameron, I stated coldly. As the Director of Acquisitions, it is my literal job to conduct deep forensic audits on any company requesting Summit Hospitality capital. I had my internal accounting team tear your startup apart piece by piece yesterday afternoon. Cameron's face turned a dangerous shade of ash gray. You had no right to look at my private financials, he stammered. You submitted them to this corporation when you requested this pitch meeting, I reminded him. And what we found was nothing short of criminal. Your revenue projections are entirely fabricated. You inflated your daily user engagement metrics by over 400% using bot accounts. You are currently bleeding capital at an unsustainable rate, and you have absolutely zero proprietary technology to justify your valuation. Your company is a hollow, empty shell burning through cash to fund your expensive leased sports cars and custom-tailored suits. That is a lie, he shouted, slamming his fist down on my desk. My startup is the next major disruptor in the market. Those executives walked out on Christmas Eve because you refused to cook the food. They left because the catering was bad. They left because they recognized a fraud the exact second they walked through the front door. I fired back, my voice rising to match his intensity. Do you honestly think global billionaires care about a bad meal? They have eaten street food in a dozen different countries. They did not walk out because of the pizza Cameron. They walked out because you explicitly claimed on your initial investor prospectus that you operated out of a multi-million-dollar commercial headquarters. When they arrived at our parents' residential home in the suburbs, they instantly realized you were lying about your corporate assets. You tried to pass off a family home as a fully functioning commercial property. They walked out because you are a liability and a liar. Cameron slumped into the guest chair, his legs completely giving out beneath him. He buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking as his entire fabricated empire burned to ash around him. The golden boy was dead. The arrogant venture capitalist was gone. He was just a terrified, fraudulent man, drowning in his own colossal incompetence. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the obsidian desk. On behalf of Summit Hospitality, I am formally rejecting your request for a $5 million seed investment. Furthermore, I am placing your startup on our internal corporate blacklist. Your fraudulent financial reporting violates multiple federal regulations, and we will not associate our brand with your toxic liabilities. This meeting is officially over. You cannot do this to me, Juliet, he begged, dropping his hands from his face and looking at me with pure pathetic desperation. I am your brother. If I do not get this money, the bank is going to seize everything. I will lose the company. I will lose my apartment. I will have absolutely nothing. Family helps family, Cameron. I quoted his own vile words back to him, watching them land like physical blows. You made it abundantly clear that my only value was blending into the background and serving your needs. You told me I was a glorified caterer. Now you are sitting in my boardroom begging for my money. You have absolutely nothing because you built your entire life on lies, entitlement, and the systematic abuse of the people around you. I reached out and pressed a sleek silver button located on the side of my desk intercom. Yes, Ms. Anderson, my executive assistant responded instantly, her professional voice filling the quiet room. Please send security up to the 45th floor, I instructed, keeping my eyes locked dead onto Cameron's terrified face. Mr. Anderson has concluded his pitch presentation and requires an immediate escort out of the building. Right away, Ms. Anderson. Cameron scrambled to his feet, grabbing his glossy presentation folders and shoving them haphazardly back into his expensive briefcase. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a mixture of absolute hatred and total defeat. You are a monster, Juliet, he spat, his voice trembling. You are going to burn in hell for this. I smiled, offering him a calm, serene expression of pure, unbothered victory. I already spent 33 years in hell, Cameron. I built this empire so I would never have to go back. Enjoy the lobby. Two towering security guards in sharp, dark suits stepped through the frosted glass doors. They flanked Cameron immediately, gesturing firmly toward the private elevator. Sir, it is time to leave the premises, one of the guards stated, leaving no room for argument or negotiation. Cameron Anderson, the golden boy of the family, the arrogant venture capitalist who had demanded I remain invisible, turned his back and walked out of my office. He was escorted into the elevator like a common trespasser, entirely stripped of his pride, his funding, and his future. The heavy frosted glass doors clicked shut, sealing him out of my world permanently. I sat back in my executive chair, turning my gaze toward the breathtaking panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. The boardroom slaughter was complete. My hands were clean. I picked up my pen, pulled a new acquisition file toward me, and seamlessly went back to work. It took exactly 48 hours for the news of my true position to thoroughly saturate the Chicago suburban elite. The country club rumor mill is a terrifyingly efficient machine, and once the executives from my Christmas Eve disaster started talking, the truth spread like wildfire. My parents discovered that the daughter they had treated like a disposable kitchen servant was actually a multimillionaire corporate titan. Their reaction was as swift as it was entirely predictable. The dynamic flipped with whiplash-inducing speed. The hostile demands vanished completely, replaced by sickeningly sweet voicemails and desperate pleas for reconciliation. Patricia called my office line directly, having somehow managed to bypass the main switchboard. Her voice was drenched in an artificial sugary warmth that made my skin crawl. She begged me to join them for a lavish dinner at one of the most exclusive steakhouses in the city, claiming they wanted to properly celebrate my incredible achievements. I agreed to meet them purely out of a cold clinical curiosity. I wanted to see exactly how they planned to navigate the massive crater they had created. When I arrived at this restaurant, the maitre d' escorted me to a secluded private dining room. Richard and Patricia were already seated. They both stood up immediately the moment I walked through the heavy velvet curtains. The sheer deference in their posture was absolutely staggering. My mother rushed forward, attempting to pull me into a tight embrace, but I simply offered a polite, rigid handshake. We sat down at the table and the performance officially began. They ordered the most expensive vintage champagne on the menu, toasting to my visionary leadership and brilliant business acumen. They acted as if the horrific events of Christmas Eve had never happened. Patricia leaned across the table, her eyes shining with practiced theatrical tears. "Oh, Juliet, we are just so incredibly proud of you," she gushed, placing her hand over her heart. "We always knew you had this brilliant spark inside you. People are calling you a hospitality genius." I took a slow sip of my water, watching her spin her desperate web. "You have a very interesting way of showing your pride, Mom," I replied, my voice completely flat. "Last month you told me I was wasting my life playing around with food. You demanded I wear a servant uniform." Patricia did not even flinch. She simply waved her manicured hand, shifting effortlessly into her favorite manipulation tactic. "Sweetheart, you have to understand my perspective," she insisted, her tone dripping with toxic maternal condescension. "The business world is completely ruthless. I knew you had a soft, creative soul, and I was terrified the corporate sharks would eat you alive. My criticism was never meant to hurt you. It was tough love, Juliet. I pushed you hard because I needed to forge you into steel. I was playing the role of the strict, demanding mother, so you would build the thick skin necessary to become a CEO. You are sitting here today as a massively successful executive because I refuse to let you settle for mediocrity." I stared at her in pure, unadulterated awe of her absolute delusion. She was genuinely attempting to take credit for the $18 million empire I had built entirely in spite of her constant emotional abuse. She wanted to frame her decades of cruelty as a masterful parenting strategy. Before I could dismantle her ridiculous narrative, Richard cleared his throat and leaned forward, resting his forearms on the pristine white tablecloth. He adopted his most serious, paternal expression. "Your mother is right, Juliet. We pushed you because we saw your massive potential. And now that you have secured this incredible financial victory, it is time to look at the bigger picture. The family legacy is at stake here." I kept my eyes locked on his face, waiting for the inevitable pivot. "Cameron is in a bit of a tight spot." Richard continued, casually waving his hand as if discussing a minor scheduling conflict. "His seed funding fell through due to a simple misunderstanding, but his software platform is still revolutionary. He just needs a bridge loan to keep his operations running until the next quarter. Since you have $18 million sitting in the bank, it is only fair that you step up and protect the family name. We need you to clear Cameron's outstanding vendor debts and invest $2 million directly into his startup." The sheer audacity of the demand hung in the quiet air of the private dining room. Patricia nodded enthusiastically, immediately backing up her husband's extortion attempt. "It makes perfect sense, Juliet," she chimed in, her voice dripping with fake logic. "You are a single woman. You do not have a husband or children to support. You absolutely do not need all that money just for yourself. Cameron is trying to build a lasting legacy. Family helps family, sweetie. It is your duty to keep him afloat, now that you have more capital than you could ever possibly spend." I looked at the two people sitting across from me. They had not changed at all. They still viewed me as nothing more than a convenient resource to be drained for Cameron's exclusive benefit. The only difference was that instead of demanding my physical labor in a kitchen, they were now demanding millions of dollars from my bank account. The absolute disrespect was no longer enraging, it was just incredibly boring. I slowly reached into my designer handbag and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. I placed it gently onto the center of the white tablecloth to cover the cost of my sparkling water. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored jacket. "My money is a massive, impenetrable firewall against your manipulation," I stated, my voice radiating absolute finality. "I am not investing a single penny in that fraudulent company. I am not clearing his debts. You chose your golden boy, and you can figure out how to save him yourselves. I will not be joining you for dinner again." I turned my back on their sputtering, shocked protests and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them to choke on their expensive champagne. I thought that absolute boundary would be the end of their desperate campaign, but I severely underestimated Cameron's capacity for reckless criminal behavior. 2 weeks later, the continuous cycle of conflict violently escalated into federal felony territory. I was sitting in my corporate office reviewing a portfolio acquisition when my lead internal counsel burst through the frosted glass doors. He placed a massive stack of legal documents directly onto my obsidian desk, his face grim and deadly serious. "We caught a fraudulent bridge loan application in the final stages of approval," he reported, tapping a specific signature line on the paperwork. "Cameron Anderson attempted to secure a massive commercial loan from a secondary private lender. He fraudulently listed Summit Hospitality as the primary corporate guarantor, and he forged your signature as the authorizing executive director." I stared at the forged signature on the paper. The connecting strokes were entirely wrong, and the final flourish was a pathetic imitation of my handwriting. Cameron was facing immediate total bankruptcy, and his absolute panic had driven him to commit severe corporate fraud. My legal team was ready to instantly reject the application and hand the evidence directly over to the police, but I held up my hand. "Block the loan application immediately," I instructed my lead counsel. "But before we involve the authorities, I want a complete forensic audit of Cameron's entire financial history. I want our accountants to tear into every single bank account, shell company, and asset tied to his name. I want to know exactly where every penny of his initial funding came from." It took my forensic accounting team exactly 48 hours to unravel the catastrophic reality of Cameron's finances. When they handed me the final report, the sheer magnitude of his betrayal made the air leave my lungs. He had not just lied to venture capitalists. He had committed the ultimate deception against the very people who worshipped him. I immediately instructed my executive assistant to summon my parents and Cameron to my corporate headquarters. I told her to inform them that it was a mandatory legal meeting regarding Cameron's loan application. They arrived at Summit Hospitality the next morning. Cameron looked like a cornered rat, sweating profusely in a wrinkled suit. Richard and Patricia walked into my massive executive boardroom, looking incredibly defensive, but still clinging to their arrogant posture. They sat down in the plush leather chairs across from me, completely unaware of the absolute slaughter that was about to take place. My corporate attorneys flanked me, standing silently against the floor-to-ceiling windows. "You tried to forge my signature on a commercial loan document, Cameron," I stated coldly, dropping the fraudulent paperwork onto the center of the boardroom table. "You committed a severe federal crime by attempting to leverage Summit Hospitality assets to save your dying company." Cameron shrank back into his chair, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. Patricia immediately slammed her hand on the table, jumping to his defense. "You leave him alone, Juliet," she shrieked. "He was desperate because you refused to help your own flesh and blood. It was just a simple mistake on the paperwork. You have the power to approve it, so just sign the damn document and let him have the money." "I am not signing anything," I replied, my voice echoing sharply off the glass walls. "But that is not why I brought you here today." When my legal team caught his pathetic forgery, I ordered a full forensic audit of his entire corporate structure. I wanted to know exactly how a man with zero proprietary technology managed to fund a downtown office space and lease expensive sports cars for 2 solid years. I looked directly at my father, watching his rigid posture. Cameron did not secure early seed funding from anonymous angel investors, Dad. He never had any outside capital. Richard frowned, his thick eyebrows drawing together in deep confusion. What are you talking about? He told us he had a massive initial funding round from a private equity firm in Silicon Valley. I slid the heavy forensic accounting report across the polished boardroom table, stopping it right in front of my father. He lied to you, I revealed, delivering the ultimate devastating truth. My accountants traced the wire transfers directly back to their original source. Cameron convinced you and Mom to take out a massive second mortgage on your suburban estate. He convinced you to quietly liquidate your entire shared retirement portfolio. He took every single dollar you spent your entire lives saving, and he burned it to the ground, funding his fake millionaire lifestyle. Patricia gasped, pressing her hands over her mouth in absolute horror. Richard stared at the financial documents, his face draining of all color as his eyes scanned the undeniable proof of his son's deception. But we have not missed any payments, Richard stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Cameron has been handling the mortgage portals for us. He has been intercepting your mail and hiding the digital notifications I corrected ruthlessly. You are currently 60 days past due on that second mortgage, Dad. The bank is initiating formal foreclosure proceedings at the end of this month. You are completely bankrupt, and you are going to lose your house. The absolute silence that fell over the boardroom was suffocating. The golden boy illusion shattered permanently, fracturing into a million unfixable pieces right in front of their eyes. Cameron sat frozen, staring at his lap, unable to meet the horrified, devastated gazes of the parents he had completely destroyed. The house of cards had finally violently collapsed, and I was sitting at the head of the table watching the dust settle. The devastating silence in the boardroom was violently shattered by a sound I had never heard in my entire 33 years of existence. My father wept. It was not a quiet, dignified shedding of tears, but a guttural, gasping sound of total, absolute ruin. He dropped the forensic accounting report onto the polished obsidian desk as if the pages were burning his hands. He turned slowly toward Cameron, his face twisting from pale shock into an unrecognizable mask of pure visceral fury. "You stole from us!" Richard roared, his voice cracking with the sheer force of his unprecedented rage. "You took our retirement. You took the house. You looked me right in the eyes and promised me we were securing the family legacy. You told us the venture capital was guaranteed." Cameron shrank back into the plush leather chair, raising his hands in a pathetic, defensive gesture. "Dad, please, you have to understand," he stammered, his voice completely stripped of its usual arrogant swagger. "I was going to pay you back. The seed round was a sure thing until the Christmas dinner fell apart. I just needed a little more runway to finalize the software platform. I was protecting you from the stress of the bridge loan." "Protecting us!" Patricia shrieked, her pristine facade completely disintegrating. She lunged across the space between their chairs, slapping her hands against Cameron's shoulders in absolute hysteria. "You bankrupt us, Cameron. You took the house. Where are we supposed to go? How are we supposed to live? All of our friends, all of our social standing, you burned it all to the ground for fake revenue projections and leased sports cars. You lied to your own mother. The golden boy illusion was dead. The perfect son, the infallible financial genius, the untouchable heir to the family pride had transformed into nothing more than a desperate criminal who had cannibalized his own parents to fund a complete delusion. The pedestal they had placed him on for 3 decades had not just toppled, it had been pulverized into dust. They were looking at him with absolute disgust and raw hatred. The fierce, unconditional loyalty they had always reserved exclusively for him evaporated right there in my corporate boardroom, replaced by the terrifying realization that they were entirely destitute. Patricia abruptly stopped shaking Cameron and slowly turned her frantic, tear-streaked face toward me. The vicious hostility she had carried into the room had completely vanished, replaced by a sickening, desperate panic. She stumbled away from Cameron and practically threw herself against the edge of my desk, grasping at the dark polished surface with trembling manicured fingers. "Juliet, please." Patricia begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic high-pitched whine. "You have to help us. You are our daughter. You are making millions of dollars now. You have an $18 million fortune sitting in the bank. You can fix this. You can buy the house from the bank and pay off the second mortgage. We can transfer the deed into your name. You would not even feel the financial impact. You cannot let your own parents be thrown out onto the street. We will lose absolutely everything." I sat perfectly still in my executive chair, looking down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless. I looked at the mother who had handed me a stained grocery list and ordered me to act like an invisible servant. "I am not buying your house, Mom," I stated, my voice perfectly level and completely devoid of any emotional warmth. "I am not paying off your second mortgage, and I am certainly not saving you from the severe consequences of your own terrible decisions." "But we are your parents," Richard pleaded, stepping up beside his wife, his pride entirely shattered. "We raised you. We provided for you. You have a moral obligation to help us in our darkest hour. You cannot just sit there in your expensive suit and watch us lose the only home we have left." "You made your choice, Dad," I replied, leaning forward slightly to ensure every single word landed with maximum impact. "You decided that Cameron was the only child worthy of your respect, your love, and your financial backing. You chose to empty your retirement accounts to fund his massive ego because you believed he was better than me. You bet your entire future on the golden boy while treating me like absolute garbage. You chose your investment. Now you get to live with the returns." Patricia let out a loud, agonizing wail, covering her face with her trembling hands as the finality of my refusal crashed over her. Richard stumbled backward, looking as though the floor had suddenly dropped out from underneath him. They were completely and utterly broken. I shifted my gaze away from my devastated parents and locked eyes with Cameron. He was staring at the floor, a pathetic shell of a man, entirely devoid of the aggressive entitlement that had defined his entire life. I picked up the fraudulent bridge loan application, the document containing my poorly forged signature, and I held it up in the quiet air. "Listen to me very carefully, Cameron," I commanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "My corporate legal team has thoroughly documented this attempted forgery. We have the digital timestamps, the internal server logs, and the physical paperwork proving you attempted to commit severe federal fraud against Summit Hospitality." Cameron finally looked up, his eyes wide and brimming with absolute terror. "Juliet, please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I will never bother you again. Just let me go." "I am going to let you walk out of this building," I said, setting the fraudulent paperwork neatly back onto my desk. "But if you ever attempt to contact me again, if you ever use my name, my company, or my professional network to secure a single cent of capital, I will take this entire folder of evidence and hand it directly to the district attorney. I will ensure you spend the next 10 years of your life sitting in a federal prison cell. You are completely dead to me. Now get out of my office." The three of them did not argue. They did not attempt to plead their case any further. The sheer terrifying weight of my ultimatum, combined with the catastrophic realization of their financial ruin, had completely stripped them of their fight. They turned in silence and walked out of the massive frosted glass doors, their shoulders slumped in total defeat. The heavy doors clicked shut, sealing them out of my corporate sanctuary permanently. I was finally completely and undeniably free. 6 months later, the harsh, bitter winter of Chicago felt like a distant, fading memory. I was standing on the grand marble terrace of a spectacular historic chateau located just outside the vibrant heart of Paris. The warm summer evening air smelled of blooming jasmine and expensive vintage champagne. I was hosting an elite exclusive gala to celebrate the massive successful integration of my hospitality firm into the global Summit portfolio. Soft classical music floated through the warm air, mingling with the bright, genuine laughter of the guests. My life had transformed into a spectacular masterpiece of my own design. I was surrounded by brilliant, supportive colleagues who valued my vision and by actual friends who loved me for my authentic self. There were no toxic demands, no impossible expectations, and no underlying currents of manipulation. I was respected, I was powerful, and I was completely at peace. Through the corporate grapevine and a few brief glances at public legal filings, I learned exactly what had happened to my family back in Chicago. The bank had officially foreclosed on their sprawling suburban estate. Richard and Patricia had been forced to downsize into a cramped two-bedroom condo in a highly undesirable neighborhood far away from their previous country club life. Their wealthy friends had completely abandoned them the moment the money ran dry. Cameron had suffered the most spectacular downfall of all. Stripped of his venture capital funds and entirely blacklisted from the corporate world, he was currently working a mid-level retail job at an electronics store. He spent his days wearing a cheap polyester uniform with a plastic name tag, answering to managers who were 10 years younger than him. His sports cars were repossessed, and his luxury apartment was gone. He was completely cut off, living the exact pathetic life he had once sneeringly predicted for me. I turned my gaze toward the breathtaking glittering lights of the Eiffel Tower, shining beautifully against the dark night sky. I raised my crystal glass of champagne, taking a slow, deliberate sip. I stood on that magnificent balcony, breathing in the cool, sweet evening breeze, watching the city of light glow endlessly before me. I was now truly, completely, and finally free. The long war was over, and I had won. The journey from being the family scapegoat to finding absolute freedom teaches us a profound lesson about self-worth and boundaries. For too long, many of us are conditioned to believe that familial love must be earned through endless sacrifice, compliance, and shrinking ourselves to make others comfortable. We are told that family must always come first, even when that relationship is a one-way street leading to our own exhaustion and humiliation. But true respect is never transactional, and genuine love should never require you to become invisible. This story reminds us that you do not owe your success, your peace, or your hard-earned resources to people who only view you as a convenience. When you are trapped in a toxic dynamic where your achievements are minimized and your boundaries are repeatedly trampled, walking away isn't a sign of weakness. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. Setting firm, unapologetic limits is essential. Stepping out of the shadow of manipulation and gaslighting is exactly how you protect the life you have worked so hard to build. You do not need to prove your value to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Your success, your peace, and your identity belong entirely to you. You do not need to yell, argue, or beg for their validation. Focus your energy on your own growth and let your undeniable independence speak for itself. Ultimately, the greatest victory isn't in seeking revenge against those who hurt you, but in building a beautiful, successful life where their opinions simply no longer matter. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with family members who refuse to see your true worth? How did you find the courage to finally walk away and build your own empire? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story of reclaiming your power resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about setting boundaries and finding your absolute freedom. Remember, your peace is always worth protecting.